You found the Stealth Podcast. Tonight, we'll travel through dark and lonely stories. Where in the world are you watching from? What time is it there? Subscribe and leave your like to support us. Let's begin. I never thought my 30th birthday would be spent huddled in my converted Sprinter van, listening to the sounds of the forest outside. My name is Elijah Mercer, and until 3 months ago, I had a perfectly normal life in Montreal. Software developer by day, rock climber on weekends, nothing extraordinary. Then the layoffs came, and suddenly remote work meant I could be anywhere. Why pay rent when I could live on the road? That's how I ended up in Algonquin Provincial Park, Ontario, on a crisp October evening. The van conversion had been my pandemic project: solar panels, composting toilet, mini kitchen with a propane stove, and a lofted bed that converted to a workspace during the day. My little mobile sanctuary. I'd been traveling through Canada for a few months now, but Ontario's forests called to me as the leaves changed. I'd splurged on a cellular signal booster that let me work from almost anywhere, and the freedom was intoxicating. Park during the day at a coffee shop or library, find a secluded spot for the night, wake up to a different view every morning. The Vanlife Instagram accounts make it look glamorous, but they don't show you the constant search for parking, the bathroom emergencies, or the occasional knock from security guards asking you to move along. That particular night, I'd found what seemed like the perfect spot. A service road off the main highway, far enough in that no one would bother me, but not so remote that I couldn't get out quickly if needed. The autumn air had a bite to it, but my small space heater kept things cozy inside as I finished up a coding project. The deadline was tomorrow, and I was determined to submit early. Around midnight, I closed my laptop and stretched. The road trip from Montreal had been long, and my shoulders ached from hunching over code all day. I heated up some canned soup on my little stove and cracked open one of the local beers I'd picked up at the last town. Through my skylight, I could see stars piercing through the gaps in the pine branches overhead, a sight my city apartment never offered. As I was washing my dishes in the small sink, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. Strange. This service road wasn't on any maps, and the park officially closed to visitors hours ago. I watched as the vehicle, a large pickup truck from what I could tell, slowly advanced down the narrow dirt road and parked about 50 yards behind me, its lights shutting off. My heart rate quickened. I wasn't doing anything wrong exactly, but stealth camping in prohibited areas always carried the risk of unwanted attention. I debated starting my engine and finding another spot, but something told me to stay put. Moving would draw attention, and besides, maybe it was just another Vanlifer looking for a quiet place to sleep. I lowered the blackout curtains I'd installed for privacy and turned off all but my dimmest reading light. Through a small gap in the curtain, I watched as 3 figures emerged from the truck, illuminated only by their flashlights. They weren't park rangers. Their movements were too casual, their voices too loud. "This is far enough," one of them said. "No one comes down this road, especially not this time of year." They opened the truck's bed and began unloading something large and heavy. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what I was witnessing. I quietly reached for my phone, but of course, no signal, even with the booster. I was completely alone. The figures moved with practiced efficiency, dragging what appeared to be a tarp-wrapped bundle into the woods. I strained to see in the darkness, holding my breath as if they might hear me through the van's insulated walls. Their flashlight beams bobbed between the trees, growing fainter as they ventured deeper into the forest. I should leave. Every instinct screamed at me to start the engine and get back to civilization. But if they heard me, if they realized I'd seen them, no, better to wait until they were gone. 20 excruciating minutes later, the figures emerged from the woods without their bundle. They were speaking in hushed tones now, and I could only catch fragments. "Deeper next time. No one will find. Clean up better than last." The words sent ice through my veins. Last time? Had they done this before? The tallest one suddenly stopped and looked directly at my van. I froze, not daring to move a muscle. "Someone's here," he said, pointing. The other 2 turned to look, and I cursed myself for not finding a more secluded spot. I quickly weighed my options: pretend to be asleep, confront them, or try to escape. The decision was made for me when they started walking toward my van. I scrambled into the driver's seat, fumbling with my keys. The engine roared to life, and I flipped on my headlights, momentarily blinding the approaching men. Their silhouettes froze, arms raised to shield their eyes. I threw the van into reverse, then drive, executing a hurried three-point turn on the narrow road. As I accelerated past them, one of the men slammed his fist against my window, his face contorted with rage. "Stop," he shouted, but I was already speeding down the service road, branches scraping against the sides of my van, my heart hammering in my chest. In my rearview mirror, I saw them running back to their truck. They were coming after me. The service road was rough, filled with potholes and exposed roots that made my van bounce violently. I traveled down it slowly during daylight. Navigating it at night while being pursued was a nightmare. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, trying to remember how far it was to the main road. 1 mile? 2. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches clawing at my windows like skeletal fingers. Behind me, headlights appeared, bright and aggressive, closing the distance rapidly. Their truck was more suited to this terrain than my van. I pushed harder on the accelerator, wincing as the undercarriage scraped against a protruding rock. The main road had to be close now. If I could just reach it, maybe I could find help, or at least witnesses that might deter my pursuers. The service road curved sharply to the right, and I nearly missed the turn, skidding on the loose gravel. The truck behind me was gaining, now just 50 yards back. I could see 3 figures in the cab, their faces indistinct shadows behind the glare of headlights. My van shuddered as I pushed it beyond its limits, praying that nothing would break down now. The trees thinned slightly. I had to be getting close to the highway. Then I saw it, the reflective sign marking the entrance to the service road. Relief flooded through me as I skidded onto the asphalt of the main highway, tires screeching in protest. I accelerated hard, the van's engine whining. In my mirror, I saw the truck pause at the junction, its headlights lingering for a moment before it turned and disappeared back into the forest. They weren't willing to pursue me on a public road where others might see. I drove for another 20 minutes, hands shaking, before pulling into a well-lit truck stop. Only then did I allow myself to breathe normally. As I sat there, engine idling, trying to process what had happened, I noticed something on the passenger seat. A small black device, no bigger than a matchbox. It definitely wasn't mine. With trembling fingers, I picked it up and examined it. A tracking device. It must have been planted when the man hit my window. These weren't just random criminals. They were organized, prepared, and now they knew exactly where I was. Dawn broke with an eerie mist hanging over the truck stop. I hadn't slept, spending the night moving the van to different spots around the parking lot, checking and rechecking that no one was following me. The tracking device lay dismantled on my countertop. I'd removed the battery after taking photos of it with my phone. Cell service had returned once I reached the highway, and I'd spent hours debating whether to call the police. What would I tell them? That I saw suspicious men in the woods? That they chased me? Without proof of what they were burying, it sounded paranoid at best. I'd retreated to the back of the truck stop, parking between 2 semis whose drivers were likely sleeping in their cabs. Safety in numbers. As I was making instant coffee on my small stove, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Unidentified body found in Algonquin Park. Police seek information. The article was sparse on details, but the location was unmistakable. A service road off Highway 60, exactly where I'd been last night. Someone must have reported the suspicious activity, or perhaps a morning hiker had stumbled upon their gruesome work. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the comments section. Most were the usual expressions of shock and sympathy, but one caught my eye. White Sprinter van, Quebec plates, seen leaving the area. Anyone with information contact. The comment abruptly ended, as if the writer had thought better of posting publicly. My blood ran cold. They were looking for me, and they were doing it in plain sight. I needed to move, to get as far away from here as possible. But first, I had to disguise my van. I drove to a hardware store in the nearest town, purchased spray paint, and found a secluded area behind an abandoned warehouse to work. Within an hour, my pristine white Sprinter was a mottled green and brown, camouflaged against forest backgrounds. Not pretty, but hopefully different enough to avoid immediate recognition. I also covered my Quebec license plates with Ontario ones I'd had made at one of those instant kiosks. Technically illegal, but survival trumped legality now. Back on the road, I stayed on secondary highways, avoiding major routes where traffic cameras might capture my image. I needed a plan. I could head back to Montreal, but what if they were watching my apartment? Moving further into Ontario seemed safer, losing myself in one of the province's countless small towns. I settled on Thunder Bay, far enough away to feel safe, but still within reach of civilization if I needed help. As I drove, my mind raced through scenarios. The men last night, they weren't just disposing of a body, they were organized, methodical. The tracking device proved they'd done this before. Were they part of something bigger? A criminal organization? Human trafficking? Drug smugglers? Whatever it was, I'd seen too much, and now they wanted to ensure my silence. I stopped only for fuel, paying cash, keeping my head down to avoid security cameras. Night fell as I approached Sudbury, roughly halfway to Thunder Bay. My eyes burned from exhaustion, and I knew driving further was dangerous. I needed sleep, but traditional campgrounds or RV parks required ID I wasn't willing to provide. Instead, I found a 24-hour Walmart, the universal haven for van lifers needing a safe place to park overnight. I chose a spot near the front, well lit and visible to the store's security cameras. If they found me here, at least there would be witnesses. Sleep came in fitful bursts, my dreams chaotic mixes of pursuit and darkness. Around 3 a.m., I woke with a start. Something had changed. The store's lights were still on. A few cars still dotted the parking lot, but an unfamiliar sedan had parked 2 spots away from me, dark blue, nondescript, with tinted windows. I watched through a crack in my curtains as a man exited the car and casually walked toward the store entrance. But instead of going inside, he circled back, phone in hand, walking slowly past my van, seemingly taking photos. My heart pounded as I slipped into the driver's seat. The man was at the back of my van now, examining the license plate. I turned the key and the engine roared to life. The man's head snapped up, our eyes met through the side mirror, and I recognized him instantly, one of the 3 from the forest. His hand moved to his waistband, reaching for something. I didn't wait to find out what. I threw the van into reverse, nearly hitting him as I backed out of the parking space, then shifted to drive and sped toward the exit. In my mirror, I saw him running back to his sedan. The chase was on again. The sedan's headlights blazed behind me as I swerved onto the main road. Sudbury streets were nearly empty at this hour, giving me little cover among other traffic. I blew through a red light, earning an angry honk from a lone delivery truck. How had they found me? I destroyed the tracker. Unless there was another one I hadn't found, or someone had recognized my van despite the hasty paint job. Either way, they were closing in, the sedan gaining ground with every turn. I took a hard right onto a residential street, hoping to lose them in the maze of suburban roads. The van's tires squealed in protest as I navigated the unfamiliar territory, my GPS useless since I dared not slow down to program it. Behind me, the sedan matched my every move, staying just far enough back to avoid drawing attention, but close enough that I couldn't shake them. I needed to get back to the highway, to find a police station or at least a crowded area where they wouldn't risk an open confrontation. The residential street dead-ended at a park. Panicking, I swerved onto the grassy field, my van bouncing violently as it struggled over the uneven terrain. The sedan followed, its lower clearance causing it to scrape and spark against the ground. I aimed for a walking path on the far side, barely wide enough for my vehicle. The van crashed through a wooden barrier, the impact sending my coffee mug flying across the cabin. The path led into a wooded area, trees slapping against my windows as I pushed forward. Emerging on the other side, I found myself in another subdivision. My wild detour had gained me precious seconds, but the sedan was still behind me, its front end now damaged but still operational. I hit the main road again and accelerated toward what I hoped was the direction of the highway. My fuel gauge showed half a tank, enough to get me far away if I could just lose my pursuers. The highway on-ramp appeared ahead, and I swerved onto it, cutting off an early morning commuter who blared their horn. Traffic was light but present, other vehicles that could serve as witnesses. I pushed my van to its limit, weaving between cars, constantly checking my mirrors. The sedan was still there, 3 car lengths back, biding its time. I was trapped in a moving prison, unable to stop, unable to seek help without endangering others. Inspiration struck as I spotted signs for the next exit, Sudbury Regional Airport. If I could make it there, I'd find security, crowds, police, safety. I took the exit ramp at dangerous speed, the van's suspension groaning under the strain. The airport was only minutes away now. Through my mirror, I saw the sedan had fallen back slightly, perhaps realizing my destination and the risk it posed to them. But they hadn't given up, they were still coming. The airport access road stretched before me, and I could see the terminal building in the distance, its lights a beacon of hope. I was going to make it. Then, with a deafening bang, my van lurched violently to the right. One of my tires had blown out, whether from the earlier off-road excursion or something more sinister, I couldn't tell. The steering wheel fought against my grip as I struggled to maintain control, the van fishtailing across the empty pre-dawn road. With superhuman effort, I managed to bring the vehicle to a stop on the shoulder, just a half-mile from the airport entrance. Through my side mirror, I watched in horror as the sedan pulled up behind me, its headlights shutting off. 3 doors opened, and the men from the forest emerged, silhouettes in the dim morning light. One held what looked like a tire iron, another something smaller that caught the light, a knife or a gun, I couldn't tell which. The third walked with confident strides toward my driver's side door. I had seconds to decide. The airport was too far to run. My phone showed no signal, some kind of jammer, I realized with dawning horror. The van was disabled. Fighting wasn't an option against 3 armed men. My eyes darted around the cabin, desperate for anything that might save me. Then I remembered the emergency flare in my roadside kit. I lunged for the glove compartment as the first man reached my window. The man's face appeared at my window, twisted in a grotesque smile as he tapped on the glass with something metallic, a pistol with a silencer attached. "Open up," he mouthed, gesturing with the weapon. My fingers closed around the flare as I heard the other 2 approaching from the passenger side. I had one chance, one desperate move that might buy me enough time to escape on foot to the airport. With a swift motion, I cracked my window just enough to light the flare and toss it into the back of my van, where I'd stored extra gasoline for emergencies. The man's eyes widened in shock as he realized what I was doing. I threw myself out the driver's door, knocking him backwards as flames erupted inside the vehicle. The van's interior was engulfed instantly, the fire feeding on the bedding, the wooden cabinetry, and, most dangerously, the propane tank for my stove. I sprinted toward the airport, not daring to look back as shouts and curses erupted behind me. I'd made it perhaps 50 yards when the explosion knocked me forward onto the asphalt. The concussive wave stole the breath from my lungs as I lay stunned, ears ringing, skin burning from the heat that washed over me. Slowly, painfully, I rolled onto my back to see my van transformed into a fireball, thick black smoke billowing into the dawn sky. Through the smoke and flames, I could make out 2 figures dragging a third away from the inferno toward their sedan. One of them was clearly injured, clutching his arm as blood darkened his sleeve. The other was supporting their companion, who seemed unable to walk. For a moment, our eyes met across the distance, and the hatred I saw there made my blood run cold. Then they were in their car, speeding away in the opposite direction from the airport, leaving me alone with the burning wreckage of my home. Airport security arrived minutes later, followed by fire trucks and police. I was wrapped in a shock blanket, treated for minor burns and cuts, and bombarded with questions I wasn't ready to answer. How could I explain what had happened? That I'd witnessed a murder and been hunted across Ontario by the killers? That I'd deliberately set my own van ablaze as a desperate last resort? The evidence was burning away even as we watched. The tracking device, my hastily painted van, any fingerprints they might have left. In the end, I told a partial truth. I was a traveler whose van had experienced electrical problems that led to a fire, which triggered an explosion of my propane tank. I'd escaped just in time. The police seemed skeptical but had bigger concerns when reports came in of a body found in Algonquin Park that matched the news article I'd seen. The connection between that murder and my accident wasn't immediately apparent to them, and I wasn't sure whether to be relieved or frustrated. Hours later, seated in a sterile interview room at the Sudbury police station, I finally told the whole story to a detective who specializes in organized crime. He listened without interruption, his face giving nothing away as I described the men in the forest, the tracking device, the pursuit, and my fiery escape. When I finished, he slid a folder across the table to me. Inside were photos of 3 men, the same 3 who had been hunting me: Teodor Vasiliev, Anton Kozlov, and Mikhail Petrov. He said, tapping each photo in turn. Part of a human trafficking ring we've been tracking for months. They bring women in from Eastern Europe through Montreal, move them through remote areas like Algonquin to avoid detection, and distribute them to clients across Ontario. The body found this morning was their latest victim, who likely tried to escape. My stomach churned as the full horror of what I'd witnessed settled in. "You're lucky to be alive," the detective continued. "These men don't leave witnesses. But now you've seen them, and they know exactly who you are." He closed the folder and fixed me with a steady gaze. "Your van explosion injured Petrov severely. He's in custody at a hospital under guard. But the other two are still out there, and they won't stop looking for you. We need your help to find them before they disappear again." This wasn't over. My life as I knew it was. My home was destroyed, my identity compromised, my safety shattered. But the nightmare wouldn't end until Vasiliev and Kozlov were caught. I thought of the woman they'd buried in the forest, of how many others might share her fate if these men continued their operation. The detective was offering me protection in exchange for my cooperation, but we both knew the truth. There was no guarantee of safety as long as they were free. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. Sometimes, survival means making impossible choices. Sometimes, facing your fears is the only way forward. And sometimes, the worst night of your life is just the beginning of a darker journey. As the detective outlined the plan to use me as bait in a carefully orchestrated trap, I realized that the most terrifying road of my van life adventure still lay ahead. And this time, there would be no driving away from the danger. My name is Vanessa Clark, 42 years old, born and raised in Calgary, but I've called Toronto home for the last decade. At least, I did until 6 weeks ago when I packed up my newly converted Ford Transit and hit the road. After 20 years in corporate marketing, burnout finally caught up with me. The pandemic, the endless Zoom calls, the constant pressure, something had to give. So when my company offered voluntary redundancies, I surprised everyone, including myself, by taking the package. The van had been my pandemic project, a labor of love that transformed a basic cargo vehicle into a cozy mobile apartment. Custom cabinets stained dark walnut, a compact kitchen with a 2-burner stove, a cleverly designed wet room with a composting toilet, and a queen-sized platform bed above ample storage. Solar panels on the roof powered my essential electronics and small appliances. It wasn't fancy by Instagram standards, but it was functional and, more importantly, it was mine. Late September found me exploring the northern shores of Lake Superior, following the Trans-Canada Highway through some of Ontario's most spectacular scenery. The fall colors were at their peak, vibrant reds and golds painting the hillsides against the backdrop of the lake's deep blue waters. During the day, I'd work on freelance projects at picturesque rest stops, and at night, I'd find secluded spots to park and sleep. The freedom was intoxicating after years of being confined to an office cubicle. That particular evening, I'd found a quiet gravel road near Marathon, Ontario, leading to what appeared to be an abandoned boat launch. The spot offered a stunning view of the lake, sheltered by tall pines that would hide my van from the main road. Perfect for stealth camping, not technically legal, but common practice among van dwellers. I'd grown skilled at finding these hidden gems, places where I could enjoy nature without drawing attention. As dusk settled, I prepared a simple dinner of pasta with local vegetables I'd picked up at a farmer's market earlier that day. Through the van's windows, I watched the sun sink below the horizon, casting long shadows across the water. The solitude was peaceful, exactly what I'd been seeking when I embarked on this new chapter of my life. After dinner, I settled into my reading nook with a mystery novel and a glass of wine, feeling more content than I had in years. Around midnight, I was startled by headlights sweeping across my windows as a vehicle pulled into the boat launch area. My heart rate quickened, an automatic response to potential discovery. Usually, I'd simply pretend to be asleep if anyone knocked, but something about the hour and the remoteness of the location put me on edge. I quietly moved to the driver's seat, ready to leave if necessary, and peered through a small gap in my window covering. A rusted pickup truck had parked about 30 feet from my van, its headlights illuminating the mist rising off the lake. Two men emerged, one tall and lanky, the other stocky and moving with a noticeable limp. They didn't look in my direction. Instead, they went to the truck bed and began unloading what appeared to be heavy equipment. Fishing gear, I thought initially, relaxing slightly. Night fishermen weren't uncommon in these parts. But as they worked, their hushed conversation drifted through my partially open window. "Make sure it's deep enough this time," the taller one said. "Last one washed up too quickly." The words sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the autumn night. These weren't fishermen, and whatever they were unloading wasn't fishing gear. I held my breath as they dragged what looked like a large rolled carpet toward the water's edge, disappearing into the darkness beyond my line of sight. I waited, frozen in indecision, as minutes stretched into what felt like hours. When they finally returned, they were soaking wet up to their waists, breathing heavily from exertion. The shorter man was laughing about something, a high-pitched, unsettling sound that set my teeth on edge. As they loaded empty containers back into their truck, the taller one suddenly paused and turned slowly in my direction. "Hey," he called out. "Is that a camper van?" My throat constricted as the man's voice cut through the night air. Instinctively, I ducked lower in my seat, though I knew it was pointless. They'd already spotted my van. My mind raced through options. Pretend to be asleep, acknowledge them casually as if I'd just arrived, or start the engine and flee. None seemed ideal. Before I could decide, footsteps crunched on the gravel, approaching my vehicle. "Hello in there," the taller man called, his voice deceptively friendly. "Didn't mean to startle you. Just noticed you parked here." He was close now, perhaps 10 feet from my driver's side door. Through the gap in my curtain, I could see him more clearly, mid-50s, weather-beaten face, wearing a flannel jacket despite the chill. Nothing overtly threatening except the circumstances and that unsettling conversation I'd overheard. I made a split-second decision and rolled down my window a few inches. "Hi there," I said, forcing cheerfulness into my voice. "Just passing through. Hope I'm not in your way." "Keep it casual," I told myself. "Don't let on that you saw or heard anything unusual." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not at all. Beautiful spot, isn't it? My brother and I come fishing here sometimes." He gestured toward the shorter man, who was still by the truck, watching us intently. "Night fishing is always better this time of year. The big ones come out after dark." I nodded, maintaining what I hoped was a convincing smile. "I'll be heading out first thing in the morning. Just needed somewhere quiet to sleep." I gestured vaguely toward the back of my van. "Long day of driving." The man studied me for a moment, then asked, "You alone?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications. My instincts screamed danger, but I kept my expression neutral. "My husband's asleep in the back," I lied smoothly. "He's exhausted after driving all day. We're meeting friends in Thunder Bay tomorrow." I hoped the mention of people expecting us might deter any ill intentions. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, and I sensed he didn't believe me. "Well, you two enjoy your night," he said finally, stepping back from my van. "Dale and I will be here a while longer. Don't mind any noise, just us loading our catch." He tipped his head in a mock salute and walked back toward his brother and their truck. I watched through the mirror as they conferred in hushed tones, occasionally glancing in my direction. My hands trembled as I considered my next move. Starting the engine now would signal my fear and might provoke them if they truly had something to hide. Staying put felt equally dangerous. I reached for my phone. No signal, as was often the case in these remote areas. I was completely isolated with two men who had potentially just disposed of something sinister in Lake Superior. I decided to wait them out. I moved to the back of the van, turned off all lights except a small reading lamp that wouldn't be visible from outside, and pulled out my emergency canister of bear spray from the storage compartment under my bed. Then I settled into a position where I could watch the men through a tiny gap in my blackout curtains. For nearly an hour, they busied themselves at the lake's edge, occasionally disappearing from view only to return with more empty containers that they loaded into their truck. Their behavior grew increasingly erratic. The shorter one, Dale, kept pacing and checking the road, while the taller one seemed to be scrubbing at something in the truck bed. Cleaning away evidence, my mind supplied unhelpfully. Just when I thought they might be finishing up, ready to leave, a new set of headlights appeared on the access road. My heart sank as a third vehicle, an SUV with dark tinted windows, pulled up beside the pickup. A well-dressed man stepped out, his posture radiating authority. Even from this distance, I could sense the tension as the brothers straightened up, suddenly deferential. Words were exchanged, too quiet for me to hear, but the body language told a clear story. The newcomer was angry. At one point, he gestured toward the lake, his movements sharp and accusatory. Then, unexpectedly, he turned and pointed directly at my van. All three men stared in my direction for a long, terrible moment. I sank lower to the floor, clutching the bear spray so tightly my knuckles whitened. Minutes later, footsteps approached again, multiple sets this time. A firm knock sounded on my side door. "Excuse me," called an unfamiliar voice, smooth and educated unlike the brothers. "Could you step outside for a moment? We need to have a conversation." My heart hammered against my ribs as I remained frozen on the floor of my van. Another knock came, harder this time. "I know you're awake in there," the educated voice continued, an edge creeping into his tone. "This doesn't have to be difficult. We just need to talk." Survival instinct finally kick-started my brain. I crawled silently to the driver's seat, blessing the rubber floor mats that muffled my movements. The keys were already in the ignition, a habit from my first week on the road when I'd locked myself out in a rainstorm. Keeping low, I peered through the windshield. The well-dressed man stood at my side door, while the brothers had positioned themselves at the front and rear of my van, effectively boxing me in. "Last chance to be reasonable," the man called, jingling something metallic. "Car keys, or perhaps something more threatening. Don't make us force this door." I had seconds to make a decision. The front of my van faced the access road. The pickup was parked to my right, the SUV behind me. My only available exit route was to the left, toward the lake. Not ideal for a vehicle, but possible if I was careful. Taking a deep breath, I turned the key and the engine roared to life. Shouts erupted outside as I threw the van into drive and wrenched the steering wheel hard to the left, accelerating onto the rocky shore beside the boat launch. The van lurched violently over the uneven terrain, my belongings crashing around in the back. Through my rearview mirror, I saw the three men running toward their vehicles. I pushed harder on the accelerator, bouncing along the shoreline, searching desperately for a path back to the main road. The headlights illuminated a narrow trail between the trees about 50 yards ahead, likely used by hikers, but wide enough for my van if I was lucky. I aimed for the opening and plunged into the forest, branches scraping against the sides of my vehicle like fingernails on metal. The trail was rugged, clearly not intended for vehicles, but my transit's higher clearance managed the terrain. Behind me, headlights appeared. The SUV had followed me onto the shore and was now giving chase through the trees. The pickup was nowhere to be seen, which worried me more than if I could track its location. The forest trail twisted sharply, forcing me to slow down or risk rolling the van. Each curve revealed more obstacles, fallen logs, protruding rocks, sudden dips that sent my vehicle lurching dangerously. The SUV stayed with me, closing the distance when I had to reduce speed. I needed to find my way back to the highway, but in the darkness and panic, I'd lost all sense of direction. After what felt like an eternity of desperate navigation, the trees thinned and my headlights swept across an open field. Relief surged through me until I realized my predicament. The field ended abruptly at what appeared to be a steep drop-off, a cliff overlooking the lake. I was trapped, with the SUV closing in behind me and nowhere left to run. In a last-ditch effort, I cut my headlights and swerved hard to the right, driving parallel to the cliff edge, hoping to find another trail or access point back to civilization. The van bounced violently across the uneven ground, threatening to tip over with each impact. Behind me, the SUV's powerful spotlights swept the area, searching for me in the darkness. The beam caught me just as I spotted what looked like another trail leading back into the forest. I accelerated toward it, but the ground suddenly gave way beneath my right tires. Not a trail, but a drainage ditch hidden by tall grass. The van tilted precariously, then rolled onto its side with a sickening crash. Pain exploded in my shoulder as I was thrown against the door, now beneath me. The engine stalled, and silence fell, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and my own ragged breathing. Dazed and disoriented, I hung suspended by my seatbelt, watching through the cracked windshield as the SUV's headlights approached slowly, deliberately, like a predator that knows its prey is wounded. I fumbled for my phone, still no signal, then for the bear spray I dropped during the crash. My fingers closed around it just as the SUV stopped about 20 yards away. 3 doors opened, and silhouettes emerged against the headlights. "Should have just talked to us," the educated voice called out, a hint of regret coloring his tone. "Now look what you've done to your beautiful van." The 3 men approached cautiously, spreading out to surround my vehicle. The taller brother was carrying something long and heavy, a tire iron or crowbar. The shorter one limped behind, giggling that unsettling laugh I'd heard earlier. I struggled to reorient myself, to find a way out of the overturned van. The side door was now above me, the driver's door pinned to the ground. The windshield was cracked but intact. The back doors might open, but they faced directly toward my pursuers. I was cornered, injured, and terrified, but I wasn't helpless. As the well-dressed man reached my van and peered through the windshield, his face illuminated by the SUV's headlights, I got my first clear look at him. Expensively tailored coat, silver hair, features that might be considered handsome in different circumstances. His eyes met mine, and a chill ran down my spine at the empty coldness I saw there. "Let's get you out of there," he said, his voice almost gentle. "Then we can discuss what you think you saw tonight." The well-dressed man tapped on my windshield with something metallic. A gun, I realized with rising horror. "We're going to break this glass," he announced calmly. "Don't do anything foolish." He nodded to the taller brother, who stepped forward with the crowbar raised. I had seconds to act before they'd have direct access to me. Summoning strength I didn't know I possessed, I unclasped my seatbelt and dropped awkwardly onto the driver's side door below me. Pain shot through my injured shoulder, but adrenaline dulled it to a manageable throb. The van's configuration had become a disorienting vertical maze. What was once the ceiling, now a wall, the passenger seat looming above me. I scrambled toward the back, using the seat frames as makeshift ladder rungs. The first blow struck the windshield, creating a spiderweb of cracks, but not breaking through. The second hit shattered the glass, sending shards raining down to where I'd been moments before. Cold night air rushed in as the taller brother cleared the remaining glass with the crowbar. "She's moving to the back," he shouted, spotting my retreat. I reached my storage area, now a jumbled mess from the crash, and frantically searched for anything useful. The bear spray was still clutched in my left hand, but I needed more. My fingers closed around my emergency roadside kit, and I yanked out the flare gun. Not a real weapon, but they wouldn't know that in the darkness. The taller brother had managed to pull himself partially through the windshield opening, his flashlight beam sweeping the interior until it landed on me. "Got her," he called to the others. "Nowhere left to run, lady." He reached toward me, his face twisted in what might have been intended as a reassuring smile, but came across as menacing. I aimed the bear spray and unleashed a cloud of capsaicin directly into his face. His scream was immediate and agonizing as he recoiled, hands clawing at his eyes. I followed quickly with the flare gun, pointing it toward the windshield opening. "Back off or I'll shoot," I shouted, my voice stronger than I felt. The well-dressed man appeared in the opening, unperturbed by his companion's distress. "That's not a real gun," he said dismissively, though he made no move to enter. "Let's be reasonable. We have no intention of hurting you unless you force our hand. We simply need to ensure you don't share what you've seen tonight." "I didn't see anything," I insisted, the flare gun still aimed steadily despite my trembling. "I was sleeping when you knocked." I panicked because it was the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere. He studied me, head tilted slightly. "Your reaction suggests otherwise. Normal people don't flee like that unless they have reason to fear." His eyes narrowed. "What exactly did you witness at the boat launch?" Tom was running out. While he kept me talking, the shorter brother had disappeared from view. I could hear movement around the van. He was likely trying to access the back doors. The well-dressed man was right about one thing. The flare gun wasn't a lethal weapon, but it could still cause serious damage in close quarters. Making a split-second decision, I fired the flare directly at the windshield opening. The well-dressed man ducked away with surprising agility as the flare shot past him, illuminating the night with its red glow as it arced into the trees. The distraction was brief but sufficient. I lunged for the emergency roof hatch, now on the wall of my overturned van, and wrenched it open. The opening was tight, especially with my injured shoulder, but fear lent me flexibility as I squeezed through into the cold night air. I emerged on what was now the side of my van, quickly assessing my surroundings. The SUV's headlights still blazed about 20 yards away, casting long shadows across the field. The well-dressed man was recovering from the flare distraction, while the taller brother remained incapacitated, howling and rubbing his eyes. The shorter one, Dale, was nowhere to be seen. I slid down the van's body to the ground and took off running toward the forest edge, staying low and away from the headlights. Behind me, shouts erupted as they spotted my escape. A sharp crack split the air, gunfire, followed by the ping of a bullet hitting metal near my head. I zigzagged instinctively, adrenaline masking the pain in my shoulder as I sprinted for the tree line. The forest swallowed me into its darkness, branches whipping my face as I plunged deeper into the unknown terrain. I could hear pursuit behind me, crashing footsteps and angry voices. The well-dressed man was shouting orders. "Circle around. Don't lose her. Remember, we need her alive if possible." Those last words chilled me more than the autumn night. Whatever they had dumped in the lake, they needed to ensure I couldn't identify them or report what I'd seen, which meant they'd keep hunting me until they found me, or confirmed I was no longer a threat. I pushed on through the underbrush, guided only by the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy. My breathing came in ragged gasps, each inhale stabbing my ribs where I must have been injured in the crash. The forest sloped downward, becoming increasingly steep until I was half running, half sliding down toward what sounded like rushing water. A river or stream might provide a path to follow, possibly leading to civilization. The ground suddenly disappeared beneath my feet as I crested an unseen embankment. I tumbled down a steep slope, unable to stop my momentum, crashing through brush and over rocks until I splashed into icy water below. The shock of cold stole my breath as I struggled to orient myself in the fast-moving current. It was a river, perhaps 15 feet across and deep enough in the middle that my feet couldn't touch bottom. I let the current carry me downstream, away from my pursuers, using my good arm to steer toward the shore when obstacles appeared. Behind me, flashlight beams swept the forest as my hunters reached the embankment I'd fallen from. I ducked lower in the water, allowing only my face to remain above the surface as I drifted around a bend in the river, temporarily hidden from their view. The cold was seeping into my core, dangerous in the autumn night, but I dared not leave the water while they were still searching. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only 10 or 15 minutes, I spotted a fallen tree extending from the shore into the river. I grabbed it, using the last of my strength to pull myself out of the water and under its shelter. Soaking wet, injured, and shivering violently, I curled into the smallest possible shape in the hollow beneath the tree's massive root system. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but I knew they wouldn't give up easily. Dawn was hours away, and with it, my best chance of finding help. Until then, I needed to stay hidden, stay warm enough to survive, and pray that the rising sun would bring salvation rather than discovery. As I huddled in my makeshift shelter, teeth chattering uncontrollably, a new sound emerged from the darkness. The mechanical whine of an engine starting up, followed by the distinctive churning of an all-terrain vehicle moving through the forest. They had brought reinforcements, and my wet trail leading from the river would be all too easy to follow come daylight. This wasn't over. It was barely beginning. First light brought no comfort, only the stark reality of my situation. My clothes had dried somewhat during the night, but the autumn chill had settled deep in my bones. My shoulder throbbed relentlessly, and when I examined it in the dim morning light, the bruising and unnatural angle suggested it was dislocated. The river gurgled nearby, a constant reminder of my narrow escape and the distance I'd traveled from my overturned van. I emerged cautiously from my hiding place, listening for any sound of pursuit. The forest was quiet except for the occasional bird call and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. My phone was ruined from the river immersion, leaving me with no means of communication. I oriented myself using the rising sun and began walking parallel to the river, hoping it would eventually lead to a road or settlement. After an hour of painful progress, the trees thinned and I glimpsed what appeared to be a cabin through the foliage. Hope surged through me until I spotted a familiar vehicle parked alongside it, the rusted pickup truck from the boat launch. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't salvation, it was the lion's den. I froze, weighing my options. The cabin likely had a phone or radio I desperately needed, but attempting to access it was suicidally risky. As I debated, The cabin door opened and the shorter brother, Dale, emerged, stretching in the morning sunlight. He appeared relaxed, unhurried, as if it were any normal day. He hadn't seen me, but one step in any direction might change that. Holding my breath, I eased back into the denser forest, moving as silently as possible despite my injuries. Once I felt reasonably concealed, I circled wide around the cabin, determined to find a road or trail that might lead to safety. The terrain was challenging, steep in places, thick with underbrush in others, and my progress was agonizingly slow. Midday found me following what appeared to be a logging road, hope rekindled that it would connect to a major thoroughfare. The sun had warmed the air, alleviating the worst of the chill, but dehydration and hunger were becoming serious concerns. I hadn't eaten or had water since before the crash. The distant rumble of an engine sent me diving into the bushes beside the road. Moments later, the SUV from the previous night cruised slowly past, the well-dressed man visible behind the wheel, scanning the roadside carefully. He was hunting methodically, and the realization that I was still so close to danger nearly broke what remained of my composure. After the SUV disappeared around a bend, I continued in the opposite direction, now moving through the forest rather than on the logging road. Hours passed as I pushed myself beyond exhaustion, driven by the primordial need to escape. Late afternoon brought me to an overlook where, through a gap in the trees, I could see the glittering expanse of Lake Superior and, more importantly, the ribbon of the Trans-Canada Highway hugging its shoreline. Civilization was tantalizingly close, perhaps 2 or 3 miles away. With renewed determination, I began my descent toward the highway, fantasizing about flagging down a passing motorist or reaching one of the small tourist stops that dotted the route. As the sun began its downward arc, casting long shadows through the forest, I allowed myself to believe I might actually survive this nightmare. That belief shattered when I heard the unmistakable sound of a twig snapping behind me. I whirled around to find the taller brother standing 15 feet away, a shotgun cradled in his arms. His eyes were still red and swollen from the bear spray, but functional enough to have tracked me through the wilderness. "Impressive," he said, his voice hoarse. "Most city folks wouldn't have lasted the night." He gestured with the shotgun barrel. "End of the line, though. Boss wants to talk to you." "Your boss already tried to kill me," I replied, my own voice barely recognizable from thirst and exhaustion. The man shook his head. "If we wanted you dead, you would be. What we want is information. How much did you see? Who have you told?" He took a step closer. "Come quietly, and this ends without more pain." My mind raced, cataloging options that ranged from hopeless to suicidal. The highway was so close. If I could just reach it somehow. "What did you put in the lake?" I asked, stalling for time, glancing around for any potential weapon or escape route. His expression darkened. "Nothing that concerns you. Or rather, nothing that would have concerned you if you hadn't been where you shouldn't have been." He raised the shotgun slightly. Last chance to make the smart choice. In that moment of standoff, fate intervened in the form of distant voices, hikers on a trail somewhere nearby. The man's head turned slightly toward the sound, his attention divided for just an instant. I seized the opportunity, charging directly at him with a desperate battle cry. The move was so unexpected that his shot went wide, the blast deafening in the forest quiet. We collided and tumbled down the steep embankment together, a tangle of flailing limbs and panicked grappling. The shotgun was knocked loose, disappearing into the underbrush as we rolled. Pain exploded through my injured shoulder, but survival instinct kept me fighting. We came to rest against a tree trunk, the impact stunning us both momentarily. I recovered first, scrambling to my feet and delivering a kick to his ribs with every ounce of strength I had left. He curled inward with a groan, giving me precious seconds to escape. I ran in the direction of the hikers' voices, screaming for help with what little breath I could muster. The forest ended abruptly at a scenic overlook parking area just off the highway. 2 startled couples stared as I burst from the trees, filthy, injured, wild-eyed with fear and desperation. "Please," I gasped, collapsing to my knees. "Call the police. Men trying to kill me." One of the men immediately pulled out his phone while his companion helped me toward their car. The women stood watch, staring anxiously at the forest edge where I'd emerged. "Someone's coming," one of them shouted, pointing at movement among the trees. Through the haze of exhaustion and pain, I saw the taller brother emerge from the forest, no longer carrying the shotgun, but clearly in pursuit. He froze when he saw the group around me, realizing he was outnumbered and witnessed. For a heartbeat, our eyes locked across the distance. Then he turned and melted back into the forest. Hours later, cleaned up and medicated in a hospital in Thunder Bay, I gave my statement to two RCMP officers who listened with increasing gravity as I recounted the events at the boat launch and everything that followed. They exchanged glances when I described the well-dressed man and the brothers. We've been investigating a series of disappearances along this stretch of Lake Superior, the senior officer explained. Primarily young women, all thought to have been traveling alone. No bodies recovered until last month, when a storm brought one to shore near Rossport. They've been doing this for a while, I whispered, the horror of it sinking in. The officer nodded grimly. Based on your description, we believe the well-dressed man is Malcolm Deering, a businessman we've had our eye on for suspected human trafficking. The brothers are likely his disposal team. A search of the area around the boat launch revealed nothing. The men had been thorough in their cleanup. My van was recovered, badly damaged but containing enough of my belongings to salvage some semblance of my former life. The police advised me to relocate, at least temporarily, while they pursued the investigation. They were confident in making arrests soon, now that they had an eyewitness, but Deering's network was extensive and potentially vindictive. 2 weeks later, as I was preparing to leave my protected accommodation for a flight to Vancouver where my sister lived, the senior RCMP officer visited with news. They'd found a cabin matching my description and executed a search warrant. The brothers had fled, but they'd left evidence behind. Damning documentation linking them to at least 7 disappearances, along with Deering's detailed instructions and payment records. We'll find them, he assured me, though his eyes held a caution I recognized. But you should know, Deering's still out there, and he knows you can identify him. I nodded, understanding the unspoken message. My life would never fully return to normal. The freedom I'd sought in my van life had been replaced by a different kind of journey, one of hypervigilance and looking over my shoulder. The open road I'd loved now seemed filled with shadows and hidden threats. As my plane lifted off from Thunder Bay's airport, carrying me toward the relative safety of a major city and family protection, I gazed down at the vast expanse of Lake Superior. Somewhere in those depths lay the victims of Malcolm Deering's operation. People who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, just as I had been. The difference was that I had escaped to tell the tale, and in doing so, perhaps brought their killers one step closer to justice. 6 months later, a news alert on my new phone caught my attention. Suspected human traffickers apprehended in northern Ontario. The article detailed the arrest of the brothers in a remote cabin near the Manitoba border. They had apparently turned on each other during questioning, each trying to minimize his own involvement. The younger brother, Dale, had provided information leading to multiple recovery operations in Lake Superior. Deering himself remained at large, last seen crossing into the United States days after my escape. The international manhunt continued, but I harbored no illusions about the resources at his disposal or his ability to disappear. My therapist suggested that acceptance was key to moving forward, accepting that complete closure might never come, that perfect justice was rarely achieved. My van remains in storage, its restoration incomplete. Some nights I dream of returning to the open road, of reclaiming the freedom and peace I'd found so briefly. Other nights, I wake in cold sweats, hearing that educated voice calling through my door, seeing those empty eyes studying me through the windshield. The road still calls to me, but now I understand its dangers in ways most travelers never will. Whatever path I choose next, I'll carry with me the knowledge that sometimes the most frightening monsters aren't supernatural entities hiding in the forest. They're the humans we pass every day, the ones whose true nature remains concealed until the moment they decide you've seen too much. I'm Elias Moreau, 29 years old, and I call Sudbury, Ontario, home. For the past year, I've been living in my converted Dodge Sprinter van, chasing freedom and adventure across Canada. Sudbury's got its charm, but the open roads where I feel alive. Last week, I decided to head to Thunder Bay for a change of pace. It's a solid 8-hour drive, and I figured I'd park somewhere quiet to soak in the solitude. Thunder Bay's got this raw, rugged beauty, lakes, forests, and a vibe that's equal parts welcoming and unsettling. I'd heard about a secluded spot near Kakabeka Falls, just outside town, perfect for stealth camping. My van's decked out with a bed, solar panels, and a tiny kitchen, so I'm self-sufficient. I was stoked to explore, maybe hike a bit, and just breathe. The drive to Thunder Bay was smooth, the highway cutting through endless pines and rocky outcrops. I stopped at a gas station in Nipigon to refuel and grab a coffee. The cashier, an older guy named Walt, chatted me up about the area. "Careful where you park," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Some spots out there, they're not as empty as they look." I laughed it off, thinking he was just messing with me, but his word stuck. I'm not one for superstitions, but there's something about these remote places that makes you second guess. Back in my van, I blasted some music to shake the unease and kept driving. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky a bloody red as I neared Thunder Bay. Kakabeka Falls was my destination, a gorgeous waterfall about 30 minutes west of the city. I'd read online it was a great spot for vanlifers, with pullouts along the road that offered privacy. I wasn't looking to break any rules, just wanted a quiet night. My buddy Theo, who I met at a van meetup in Toronto, had camped there last summer and raved about it. Theo's the kind of guy who's always got a story, half of them sound made up, but he swore Kakabeka was paradise. I trusted him mostly. As I pulled off the main road onto a gravel path, the fall's roar filled the air. It was loud, almost too loud, like it was drowning out everything else. I liked that. Felt like it'd cover any noise from my van. I found a flat spot about a quarter-mile from the falls, tucked between some pines. It was perfect, hidden from the road, with a clear view of the stars through my skylight. I parked, leveled the van, and popped open a beer to celebrate. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and pine needles. I'd been on the road for months, but moments like this made it worth it. I scrolled through my phone, checking messages. My sister, Lila, had texted from Sudbury, asking if I was still living like a hobo. I shot back a selfie with the van, grinning. She worries, but I love this life. Still, as the dark settled in, I couldn't shake Walt's warning. It was probably nothing, right? Night fell fast, the kind of dark that swallows everything. I cooked some ramen on my stove, the hissing propane a small comfort. Outside, the falls kept up their roar, but it felt different now, like it was masking something. I tried to focus on my food, but my eyes kept darting to the windows. I'd blacked them out with magnetic covers, standard for stealth camping, but it made the van feel like a bunker. I'm not paranoid, but I've seen enough horror flicks to know better than to ignore a gut feeling. I double-checked the locks, just in case. Thunder Bay's safe, I told myself. Just a small city with friendly folks. Still, I kept my pocket knife close. I climbed into bed, the van's interior cozy with fairy lights and a thick blanket. I was tired from the drive, but sleep didn't come easy. The falls were loud, sure, but there was something else, a faint hum, almost like a voice, weaving through the water's roar. I sat up, heart thumping. Probably just my imagination, I thought, but it was disturbing. I grabbed my flashlight and peeked through a gap in the window cover. Nothing but trees and darkness. I laughed at myself. Elias, you're losing it. But as I lay back down, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was out there, watching. I thought about Theo again. He'd mentioned meeting another vanlifer at Kakabeka, a woman named Maris, who'd been traveling solo for years. Theo said she was tough as nails, knew every trick in the book for staying safe. I wished I'd asked for her contact info. Maybe she'd camped here before, knew if this spot was legit. My phone had no signal, typical for these remote areas, so I couldn't even Google the place. I told myself I was overthinking it. I'd camped in sketchier spots than this, like that time in Manitoba when a coyote howled right outside my van. This was just nerves. I closed my eyes, willing sleep to come. The night stretched on, and I drifted in and out of a restless doze. Every creak of the van, every gust of wind, had me on edge. I kept thinking about Walt's face, the way he'd looked at me, like he knew something I didn't. It was stupid, but it felt scary, like I'd stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to. I checked my watch, 2 a.m. I just needed to make it to morning. The falls roared on, relentless, and that hum was still there, faint but persistent. I pulled the blanket tighter, telling myself it was nothing. just the wilderness playing tricks. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. I started thinking about my plans for the next day. I'd hike to the falls, snap some photos, maybe grab breakfast in Thunder Bay. Normal stuff to keep my mind off the creepy vibes. I'd been to plenty of places like this, and nothing bad had ever happened. Well, except that one time in Quebec when I got stuck in mud and had to call a tow. That was more annoying than scary, though. I chuckled, trying to lighten my mood, but it didn't help much. The darkness outside felt heavy, like it was pressing against the van. I didn't know it yet, but that night was about to turn into something straight out of a horror story. Morning hit like a slap, the falls roar yanking me out of a half-sleep. My eyes were gritty, and my neck ached from tossing and turning. I'd barely slept, that weird hum from last night still nagging at me. I crawled out of bed, popped the van's side door, and stepped into the chilly air. The pines loomed tall, their shadows long and jagged across the gravel. I stretched, trying to shake the unease. My plan was simple: hike to Kakabeka Falls, snap some pics, then head into Thunder Bay for coffee. But as I boiled water for oatmeal, I noticed something off. My van's rear tire looked low, real low. I cursed under my breath. A flat out here? That's the kind of problem that turns a chill day into a headache. I grabbed my tire gauge from the storage bin and checked the pressure. Sure enough, it was shot. 15 psi when it should have been 50. I've dealt with flats before, like that time in Alberta when a nail wrecked my plans. But this tire didn't look punctured. No holes, no tears, just deflated. It was disturbing, like someone had messed with it. I shook my head, probably just paranoia from Walt's creepy warning. Still, I didn't have a signal to call for help, and the spare was my only shot. I got to work, jacking up the van and swapping the tire. The whole time, I kept glancing at the trees, half expecting someone to step out. The fall's roar felt like it was mocking me. I kept moving, faster now, the falls growing louder. My phone was useless, no bars, no GPS. I regretted not telling anyone my exact plans. Lila knew I was in Thunder Bay, but not where I'd parked. Stupid move, Elias. I thought about Theo, how he'd camped here without issue. Maybe I was overreacting. But then I remembered a story he'd told me about a Vanlifer in BC who found weird symbols carved near their camp. Theo laughed it off, but it didn't seem funny now. The trail opened to a clearing, and there it was, Kakabeka Falls, massive and thundering. It should have been awe-inspiring, but it felt ominous, like it was hiding something. At the falls lookout, I wasn't alone. A guy stood there, maybe 40, in a worn jacket and boots caked with mud. He introduced himself as Cal, a local out for a walk. He seemed friendly, but his eyes darted too much, like he was sizing me up. "You camping nearby?" he asked, nodding toward my backpack. I lied, said I was just passing through. Something about him felt off, like he knew more than he was letting on. We chatted about the falls, but I kept my distance. He mentioned a rough crowd that sometimes hung out in the area at night. My gut clenched. Was he warning me, or fishing for info? I cut the conversation short and headed back to the van, my mind racing. Cal's words stuck with me. Rough crowd. Was that who'd messed with my tire? I tried to stay rational. Maybe the tire was just bad luck, and the rocks were some kid's prank. But the hum, the fabric, Cal's weird vibe, it was all adding up to something scary. Back at the van, I checked everything again. The spare held, but I noticed fresh scratches on the rear door, faint but definitely new. My heart sank. I hadn't hit anything driving in. Someone had been here. I climbed inside, locked up, and sat there, debating whether to stay or risk the drive to town. I decided to stay one more night, mostly because the spare wasn't built for long hauls, and I didn't want to get stuck on some back road. But I wasn't dumb. I moved the van to a new spot, closer to the main road, but still hidden. It took 20 minutes of slow driving, dodging roots and rocks. The new spot felt safer, with a clear view of the road. I rigged a makeshift alarm, tying a string with cans to the van's bumper. If anyone got close, I'd hear it. It was a trick I'd learned from Maris, that Vanlifer Theo mentioned. She'd used it in sketchy spots. I felt a bit better, but not much. The hum was louder here, almost like a chant. As dusk settled, I cooked dinner, but my appetite was gone. I kept replaying the day. The tire, the rocks, Cal's shifty eyes. I'd made mistakes. Not checking the tire before parking, not telling Lila my exact location, talking to Cal at all. The fall's roar was deafening now, blending with that disturbing hum. I peeked through the window cover, scanning the trees. Nothing. But I couldn't relax. I grabbed my knife, set it on the counter, and turned off the lights. I wasn't sleeping tonight, not with the feeling that something or someone was out there, waiting for me to slip up. Darkness wrapped the van like a shroud. The falls roar a constant pulse in my ears. I sat on my bed, knife in hand, staring at the window covers as if they'd betray me. That hum, now a low, rhythmic chant, crawled under my skin. It wasn't the wind or some trick of the water. It was human, deliberate, and close. My string and cans alarm hadn't tripped, but that didn't ease the knot in my gut. I'd moved the van to feel safer, but this spot felt worse, like I'd parked in the heart of something sinister. I kept thinking about Cal's words, a rough crowd. The scratches on my door, the deflated tire, that creepy rock pile. This wasn't random. Something horror-filled was happening, and I was caught in it. I turned off my phone to save battery, the screen's glow too exposing. Silence was my only defense, but it made every noise louder. A twig snapped outside, sharp and close. My heart slammed against my ribs. I froze, straining to listen. Another snap, then a low murmur, not the chant, but voices. Plural, muffled, like they were trying to be quiet, but they were there, maybe 20 feet away. I gripped the knife tighter, my palms sweaty. I'd camped in remote spots before, like that time in Nova Scotia when I heard a bear sniffing around. This wasn't wildlife. This was people, and that made it so much scarier. I inched toward the window, peeling back a corner of the cover. My eyes adjusted to the dark, catching faint movement among the pines. Shadows, 2, maybe 3, slipping between trees. They weren't stumbling hikers or lost campers. Their movements were careful, practiced, like they knew exactly where my van was. My breath hitched. I thought of horror movies where the victim hides, thinking they're safe, only to get nabbed. I wasn't about to be that guy. But what could I do? Drive off on a spare tire? Confront them? Every option felt like a trap. The chant grew louder, words I couldn't make out, but it was chilling, like a ritual. I slid to the driver's seat, keeping low, and checked the keys in the ignition. If I had to bolt, I'd be ready. My mind raced back to Cal at the falls. Had he been part of this? His shifty eyes, that vague warning, it fit too well. I cursed myself for not leaving after the tire incident. I'd been stubborn, thinking I could handle anything. Like that time in Manitoba when I stayed put during a storm and nearly froze. This was worse, way worse. The voices stopped, replaced by footsteps crunching closer. Not hurried, but steady. My alarm cans rattled faintly, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. They were right outside. I ducked below the dashboard, clutching the knife. My van was my home, but now it felt like a cage. I pictured Theo, always so chill, telling me to trust my gut. My gut was screaming to get out, but how? The footsteps circled the van, slow and deliberate. I heard a soft scrape, metal on metal, like someone testing the door. My blood ran cold. The locks held, but for how long? I thought of Maris, the Vanlife Theo mentioned, who'd camped in sketchy spots. She'd probably have a plan, pepper spray, a hidden escape hatch. Me? I had a knife and a prayer. The chant started again, closer, more intense, and it was beyond disturbing. A whisper cut through the noise, right outside my side door. He's in there. A man's voice, low and certain. My stomach dropped. They knew I was here. I bit my lip to keep from making a sound, my mind spinning. I remembered a news story from Sudbury about a guy attacked in his car by a gang. He'd fought back and barely survived. I wasn't that guy. I wasn't trained for this. The shadows outside shifted, and I caught a glimpse through the window gap. A figure in a hooded jacket, holding something long and thin. A crowbar? A bat? Whatever it wasn't friendly. I scrambled to the back, checking my makeshift defenses. The cans had stopped rattling, but that didn't mean they'd left. I grabbed a flashlight, keeping it off for now. My van's layout was tight. Bed, kitchen, storage, but there was no real hiding spot. I thought about Lila, how she'd begged me to get a satellite phone for emergencies. I'd laughed it off, said I'd be fine. Now I was kicking myself. The chant grew frantic, voices overlapping, and I caught a word. Take. Take what? Me? My stuff? The horror of it sank in. They weren't here to rob me. This was something darker. I crouched by the bed, knife ready, trying to think. I could start the van, ram through whatever was out there, but the spare tire wouldn't last long. I could wait them out, hope they'd leave, but that felt like wishful thinking. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, it was just the falls and the chant. Then a loud bang rocked the van, metal crunching near the rear door. I yelped, clapping a hand over my mouth. They were trying to get in. My heart pounded so hard I thought it had burst. I flashed back to Cal's face, his knowing smirk. Had he sent them? The bang came again, harder, and the door groaned. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking. I didn't want to use it, didn't want to draw attention, but I needed to see. The chant was a fever pitch now, voices circling the van like wolves. I thought of every mistake I'd made. Parking here, ignoring Walt's warning, not leaving after the tire. I wasn't religious, but I whispered a prayer, begging for a way out. Another bang, and the rear door buckled slightly. They were close to breaking through. I had minutes, maybe seconds, to decide my next move. The terror was real now, no longer a vague feeling but a living, breathing nightmare closing in. The rear door buckled again, metal screaming under another blow. I scrambled to the driver's seat, knife in one hand, keys in the other. My heart was a jackhammer, the chant outside a frenzied howl. I had to get out now. I jammed the key into the ignition, the van roaring to life. The spare tire was a risk, but staying was suicide. I flicked on the headlights, catching 3 figures in hoods, one swinging a crowbar. Their faces were shadowed, but their eyes glinted with something feral. I slammed the gas, the van lurching forward, tires spitting gravel. They scattered, but not before one hurled something heavy. It smashed the side window, glass spraying my arm. The horror of it, those eyes, that chant, pushed me to keep driving, no matter what. I tore down the gravel path, branches scraping the van's sides. The spare tire wobbled, threatening to give out, but I couldn't stop. The fall's roar faded, but the chant lingered, like it was burned into my brain. I glanced in the rear view, headlights. They were following me, a truck by the look of it, gaining fast. My gut twisted. This was a nightmare, straight out of a scary movie where the victim thinks they've escaped, only to get caught. I'd seen enough to know I wasn't out of danger. The road was narrow, twisting through pines, and my van wasn't built for speed. I gripped the wheel, praying the tire held, praying I'd make it to the highway. The truck's lights filled my mirrors, blinding me. A horn blared, long and mocking. I swerved to avoid a pothole, the van fishtailing. My arms stung from the glass cuts, blood soaking my sleeve. I thought of Lila, how she'd lose it if I didn't make it home. I'd been dumb, ignoring Walt, staying after the tire, talking to Cal. Every mistake was a weight, but I couldn't dwell. I floored it, the van rattling like it'd shake apart. The truck rammed my bumper, jolting me forward. I yelped, the knife falling to the floorboard. They weren't just chasing, they wanted me dead. The thought was disturbing, but it fueled my fight to survive. I hit the main road, tires screeching as I turned toward Thunder Bay. The truck stayed close, its engine roaring like a beast. I remembered a gas station a few miles ahead, the one I'd stopped at in Nipigon. If I could get there, maybe someone would help. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. The spare tire was shredding, the van pulling hard to the right. I gritted my teeth, willing it to hold. The truck rammed me again, harder, and I nearly lost control. I pictured Theo, always calm in a crisis, telling me to breathe and think. I was trying, but the terror was overwhelming, every second a fight to stay alive. The gas station's lights glowed in the distance, a faint hope. I pushed the van harder, the wheel vibrating in my hands. The truck backed off slightly, maybe wary of witnesses, but it didn't stop. I swerved into the station's lot, tires smoking, and slammed on the brakes. The place was empty, the clerk nowhere in sight. My heart sank, but I leapt out, sprinting for the door. It was locked. I pounded on the glass, screaming for help. The truck idled at the lot's edge, its headlights pinning me like a spotlight. I ducked behind a pump, my breath ragged. This wasn't over. The horror was still coming for me. I scanned the lot, desperate for a plan. My van was trashed, the spare tire flat, glass littering the seats. I couldn't drive, but I could run. The forest bordered the station, dense and dark. If I could lose them in the trees, maybe I'd have a shot. I bolted, legs burning, as the truck's doors slammed open behind me. Footsteps pounded, voices shouting. I didn't look back. The woods swallowed me, branches clawing my face. I'd hiked enough to know how to move through brush, like that time in Quebec when I got lost for hours. But this was different. This was a life or death chase. and they were close. I zigzagged through the pines, my flashlight off to stay hidden. The voices were fainter now, but still there, calling to each other. I tripped over a root, slamming my knee into a rock. Pain shot through me, but I bit back a scream. I crawled behind a fallen log, heart pounding so loud I swore they'd hear it. The chant started again, eerie and low, echoing through the trees. It was like they were taunting me, drawing out the fear. I clutched a jagged stone, my only weapon now. The horror of being hunted like this, it was unlike anything I'd ever felt. I had to keep moving, had to survive. I waited, listening. The voices seemed to split, some moving left, others right. They were searching, but I had a moment. I crept forward, staying low, aiming for a creek I'd heard earlier. Water could mask my tracks, like I'd read in some survival book. My knee throbbed, slowing me, but I pushed on. The trees thinned, and I saw the creek, its banks muddy and steep. I slid down, splashing into the shallow water. It was freezing, soaking my jeans, but I didn't care. I waded downstream, hoping it'd throw them off. The chant grew distant, but I wasn't safe, not yet. The night was still a terrifying maze of danger. I followed the creek, shivering, my breath fogging in the air. The gas station felt miles away, my van a lost cause. I thought of Maris, how she'd probably have outsmarted these creeps. Me? I was barely hanging on. The forest was quiet now, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I climbed out of the creek, my shoes squelching, and crouched behind a boulder. I needed a plan, find a road, flag someone down, anything. But as I caught my breath, a twig snapped nearby. Too close. My blood froze. I peeked around the boulder, and there he was, a hooded figure, crowbar in hand, scanning the dark. He was alone, but he was coming right for me. I gripped the stone, my hands trembling as the figure crept closer. His crowbar glinted under the moonlight, swinging lazily, like he was savoring the hunt. I was cornered, the creek at my back, the boulder my only cover. I'd escaped the van, the truck, the chase, but this was it, the moment it all went wrong. I thought of Lila, how I'd promised to visit her in Sudbury next month. That promise felt like a cruel joke now. The horror of facing this guy, knowing what he could do, paralyzed me. I'd made it this far, but one mistake could end it. I held my breath, praying he'd pass, but his boots crunched closer, stopping just feet away. He muttered something, his voice low and guttural, like a curse. I had two choices, stay hidden and hope, or fight. Hiding hadn't worked so far. They'd found my van, tracked me to the gas station, chased me here. Fighting wasn't my style, but I wasn't dying without a swing. I tightened my grip on the stone, my knee screaming as I shifted. I remembered a bar fight in Sudbury once, where I dodged a drunk guy's punch. This was scarier, but the instinct was the same. Move fast, don't think. The guy turned, his eyes locking onto the boulder. He knew. My heart stopped. I sprang up, hurling the stone at his head. It connected with a sickening crack, and he stumbled, cursing, blood streaming down his face. I didn't wait. I ran, splashing back into the creek, my knee buckling with every step. His shout echoed, angry and pained, and soon others answered. They were coming, all of them. The chant was gone, replaced by raw, furious yells. I'd hurt one, and now they were pissed. The forest blurred as I pushed through branches, my lungs burning. I thought of Theo, how he'd laugh at my dumb luck, then tell me to keep going. But luck was running out. The creek curved, leading to a clearing, and I saw lights. Headlights, maybe a road. Hope flared, but it was a trap. My biggest mistake was thinking I could outrun them. I burst into the clearing, expecting salvation, but it was just the truck, parked, its lights blazing. Two more figures stood there, one with a shotgun. My stomach dropped. I'd run right to them. The guy I'd hit was behind me now, limping but closing in, crowbar raised. I dove to the side, dodging a swing, but the shotgun guy stepped forward, calm and cold. "Enough," he said, voice like gravel. I froze, hands up, my mind blank with terror. I'd fought, I'd run, but this was it. The horror of facing that barrel, knowing what came next, was worse than anything. I stammered, begging, but they just stared, eyes empty, like I wasn't human to them. The crowbar guy grabbed my arm, wrenching it behind me. Pain shot through my shoulder, but I didn't scream. I was too scared. They dragged me toward the truck, the shotgun guy leading the way. I thought of every horror story I'd heard, like that couple in BC who vanished camping. Was this what happened to them? My van, my home, was gone, probably stripped by now. I'd been so cocky, thinking I could handle the road alone. I pictured Lila's face, how she'd never know what happened. The truck's tailgate dropped, revealing ropes and a tarp inside. My blood ran cold. They weren't just going to kill me, they had plans. I twisted, desperate, kicking at the crowbar guy's knee. He grunted, loosening his grip, and I broke free, sprinting for the trees. A shotgun blast tore through the air, buckshot ripping into my side. I screamed, collapsing, the pain like fire. I crawled, blood soaking my shirt, but they were on me fast. The crowbar cracked against my skull, stars exploding in my vision. I thought of Maris, how she'd have fought smarter. My last mistake was running into that clearing, thinking I had a chance. The disturbing truth hit me. They'd planned this, lured me here, like it was a game. They tied my wrists, rough rope biting my skin, and threw me into the truck. The tarp smelled of oil and something worse, something rotten. I was fading, blood pooling under me, my thoughts sluggish. I saw Walt's face, his warning, and Cal's smirk. Had they set me up? The truck rumbled to life, bouncing over rough ground. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone. The horror wasn't just dying. It was knowing they'd done this before, would do it again. I thought of my van, my freedom, now a distant dream. My eyes closed, the world slipping away, as the truck carried me into the dark. I don't know how long I was out, but I woke to pain, every breath a knife in my side. The truck had stopped, and they were arguing outside, voices sharp. I was still in the back, tarp half off, the ropes loose from my thrashing. I could barely move, but I had one shot. I rolled out, hitting the ground hard, and crawled toward a ditch. My vision swam, blood trailing behind me. They didn't notice, they were too busy fighting. I thought of Lila, how I'd promised to call her. That promise was all I had left. But the shotgun guy turned, saw me, and raised his weapon. The last thing I heard was the click of the trigger, and then, nothing. The tragedy was complete. I'd chased freedom, lived my dream, but Thunder Bay was my end. My van, my life, was just another story now, one Lila would never fully hear. The creeps who got me, they'd keep going, hunting others, their chant echoing in the dark. I'd made mistakes, ignored warnings, and paid the price. The horror wasn't just my death, it was the certainty they'd never stop. Kakabeka Falls would roar on, hiding their secrets, while my van rusted somewhere, a forgotten relic of a life cut short. The road had called me, but it led to a nightmare I couldn't escape. I'm Nora Kwan, 32 years old, and I live in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. For 2 years, I've been a vanlifer, cruising in my converted Ford Transit, chasing quiet corners of Canada. Salt's cozy, but the road's my real home. Last weekend, I drove 7 hours to Thunder Bay, craving its wild forests and Lake Superior views. I'd heard about a sweet camping spot near Mount McKay, a rocky lookout just south of the city. My van's got a bed, solar setup, and a propane stove, everything I need to disappear for a bit. Thunder Bay felt like the perfect escape, a place to hike, sketch, and breathe. I was ready for solitude, but something about the city's edge, where urban meets wilderness, gave me a weird vibe. The drive was gorgeous, Highway 17 winding past lakes and cliffs. I stopped at a diner in Wawa for a burger, chatting with a waitress, Gina, who warned me about Thunder Bay's backroads. "Stick to main routes," she said, her smile tight. "Some folks out there don't like strangers." I brushed it off, small-town gossip, right? I'd camped in dicey spots before, like that time in New Brunswick when a storm nearly flipped my van. I could handle it. Still, her words lingered as I hit the road again, the sun sinking fast. By the time I reached Thunder Bay, the sky was a bruised purple, and Mount McKay loomed like a sleeping giant. I'd found the Mount McKay spot on a Vanlife forum. A guy named Dax, who I'd swapped tips with online, said it was secluded but legal for overnight parking. The road up was rough, all dirt and ruts, but my van's high clearance got me through. I parked in a clearing with a killer view of the city lights below. The air smelled of pine and damp rock, and the quiet was perfect. I popped open a soda, fired up my stove for chili, and settled in. My sister, Ivy, texted from Salt, asking for a pic. I sent one of the view, joking I was living the dream. But as night fell, the dream felt a little too quiet. I locked the van, a habit from years on the road. My setup stealthy, blackout curtains, no exterior lights, so I blend into the dark. I scrolled through Dax's forum posts, double-checking the spot. He'd mentioned meeting a local hiker here, an older woman named Ruth, who'd shared tips about the area. Ruth sounded cool, like someone I'd vibe with. I wished I had her number, just in case. No signal up here, though, which wasn't unusual. I sipped my chili, savoring the warmth, but kept glancing at the windows. The mountain felt alive, like it was watching me. Silly, but it was hard to shake. Night deepened, and the clearing turned pitch black. I climbed into bed, fairy lights casting a soft glow inside. I'm no stranger to solo camping. I've done it everywhere from PI to Alberta, but something about this spot felt off. Maybe it was Gina's warning, or the way the trees seemed to lean in. I laughed at myself, thinking of horror flicks where the girl ignores her gut and regrets it. I wasn't that girl. Still, I grabbed my multi-tool, tucking it under my pillow. It's got a knife, pliers, the works, handy for emergencies. I checked the locks again, just to be sure, and tried to relax. Sleep didn't come easy. The mountain was silent, no wind, no critters, just this heavy stillness. I thought about Ivy, how she calls my van life glorified homelessness. She's half right, but I love it. Still, moments like this, alone in the dark, made me question my choices. I drifted off, only to jolt awake at a faint noise, a scrape, like metal on rock, outside. My heart kicked up. Probably a raccoon, I told myself, but it was disturbing. I lay still, listening, the multi-tool cold in my hand. The scrape came again, closer, and I swore I heard a whisper. My skin crawled. I sat up, pulse racing, and peeked through a curtain gap. Nothing but darkness and the faint outline of trees. I'd parked away from the road, hidden by brush, so no one should have known I was here. But that scrape wasn't random. I thought of Dax's stories about sketchy locals in remote spots. He'd laughed them off, but I wasn't laughing. I turned off the fairy lights, plunging the van into black. The silence was worse now, like it was waiting for something. I gripped the multi-tool, telling myself I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew something scary was out there. I tried to think logically. Maybe it was hikers or kids messing around. Thunder Bay's got its share of teens who'd think spooking a vanlifer is funny. I'd dealt with that in Manitoba once. Kids throwing rocks at my van. Annoying, but harmless. This felt different, though. The scrape, the whisper, it was too deliberate. I thought about Ruth, the hiker. If she knew this area, she'd probably avoid it at night. I wished I'd asked Dax more questions. My phone was useless, no bars, so I was on my own. I settled back, eyes wide, ready for anything. The night dragged, each minute heavier than the last. I kept replaying Gina's warning, her tight smile. Had she known something? I'd been cocky, thinking I could camp anywhere and be fine. Like that time in Quebec when I parked on private land and got chased off by an angry farmer. That was embarrassing, not terrifying. This was something else. The mountain's silence pressed against the van, and that scrape came again, slow and rhythmic, like someone circling. I didn't know it yet, but I'd parked in the wrong place, and that mistake was about to turn my night into a horror story. Dawn broke gray and cold, Mount McKay's shadow looming over my van. I'd barely slept, that scraping noise and whisper keeping me on edge. I crawled out of bed, my multi-tool still clutched tight, and checked the windows. Nothing looked disturbed, but my nerves were shot. I needed coffee, but first, I noticed something wrong. My van's side door was unlocked. I swore I'd locked it last night. My heart thudded. Had I slipped up, or had someone tampered with it? I've forgotten to lock up before, like that time in Nova Scotia when a raccoon got in, but this felt scarier. The clearing was empty, just pines and rocks, but Gina's warning about locals echoed in my head. I had to decide, stay or bail. I stepped outside, scanning the ground for clues. The dirt around the van was scuffed, like someone had walked close. No clear footprints, but it was disturbing. I checked the door's lock. It wasn't broken, just unlatched. Maybe I'd been careless, but doubt gnawed at me. I thought of Dax's forum post about Ruth, the hiker who knew this area. She'd probably double-check everything. I locked the door, my hands shaky, and decided to hike Mount McKay's trail to clear my head. Staying put felt risky, but driving off without a plan wasn't smart either. I grabbed my backpack, multi-tool, and a water bottle, hoping daylight would chase away the creepy vibes. The trail was steep, winding up the mountain through thick brush. The air was crisp, but the silence from last night lingered, broken only by my boots crunching gravel. I kept thinking about Ivy, how she'd freak if I told her about the door. I should have texted her my exact location. Dumb move, Nora. Halfway up, I found a small carving on a tree, a crude arrow pointing down, scratched deep. It wasn't a trail marker. It felt like a message, and not a friendly one. My stomach twisted. I'd seen weird stuff camping, like that time in Alberta with creepy graffiti on a rock. But this was different. Personal, almost. I kept climbing, the city's sprawl visible below. At a lookout, I met a hiker, a guy in his 50s named Vern, with a scruffy beard and a worn pack. He seemed nice, asked if I was local. I said I was just visiting, keeping it vague. He mentioned odd folks, who sometimes hung around the mountain at night. His tone casual, but his eyes sharp. It reminded me of Gina's warning, and it was unsettling. Was Vern hinting at something, or just chatty? I didn't trust my instincts anymore. I thanked him and moved on, but his words stuck, making the trail feel less like an escape and more like a trap. Back at the van, I checked everything again. The door was still locked, but I noticed faint scratches near the handle, barely visible unless you looked close. My pulse spiked. They weren't there yesterday. Someone had been here, maybe while I was hiking. The horror of it hit me. Someone knew I was alone. I thought of a news story from Salt about a car breaking gone wrong, the victim beaten bad. This felt worse. I debated driving to Thunder Bay, but the van was low on gas, and I hadn't seen a station nearby. Leaving now meant risking a breakdown on these back roads. I decided to stay, but not in the same spot. I drove the van a half-mile down the road, parking behind a cluster of boulders for cover. It was a pain, dodging ruts, but I felt safer hidden. I rigged a tripwire with fishing line and a bell from my gear, a trick I'd learned from a Vanlife blog. If anyone got close, I'd know. I thought of Ruth, how she'd probably have a whole security system. My setup was basic, but it was something. I cooked rice, trying to stay calm, but every sound made me jump. The mountain silence was back, heavy and wrong. As dusk fell, I double-checked the locks and curtains. Vern's comment about odd folks gnawed at me. Had he been warning me, or involved somehow? I'd been too open, chatting like he was harmless. Another mistake. I thought of Dax, how he'd camped here without trouble. Maybe I was unlucky, or maybe he'd left out the scary parts. The bell stayed quiet, but that scraping noise returned, faint but unmistakable, near the boulders. My heart raced. I gripped the multi-tool, cursing myself for not leaving earlier. The night was closing in, and it felt like a horror story waiting to unfold. I sat in the dark, lights off, listening. The scraping stopped, but now there was a new sound, soft thumps, like footsteps circling the van. Not rushed, but deliberate. My mouth went dry. I peeked through a curtain gap, seeing nothing but shadows. I remembered a time in Manitoba when kids pranked my van, banging on the sides. This wasn't kids. This was calculated, and it was terrifying. I slid to the driver's seat, keys ready, but driving blind on these roads was a last resort. I needed to stay sharp, but fear was clouding my head. I thought about my next move. I could wait it out, hope they'd leave, or start the van and risk a chase. Both options sucked. I hadn't told Ivy or anyone where I was. Another screw-up. The thumps grew closer, and the bell jingled faintly, just once. Someone was out there, testing my defenses. The horror of being watched, stalked, was sinking in. I clutched the multi-tool, my only lifeline, and tried to breathe. I didn't know it yet, but staying put was about to make things so much worse. The bell jingled again, sharp and final, cutting through the night. I froze in the driver's seat, multi-tool in hand, my breath shallow. The thumps outside weren't random. They were circling tighter, like wolves closing in. Mount McKay's silence was gone, replaced by low murmurs, human voices, too close. My tripwire had worked, but now I was trapped in a horror show. The scratches on the door, the unlocked latch, Vern's weird vibe, it all clicked. Someone had been stalking me since I parked here. My van, my safe haven, felt like a coffin. I thought of Gina's warning about strangers. This was no prank. Something scary was out there, and it knew exactly where I was. I slid low, peeking through a curtain slit. Shadows moved among the boulders. 2 figures, maybe 3, hunched and deliberate. One held something long, like a pipe or bat. My stomach lurched. I'd seen enough true crime docs to know how this could end. Like that hiker in BC who vanished, her car found empty. I wasn't going out like that. But my options were trash: drive and risk the ruts, or hide and pray. The murmurs grew clearer, words like check and now, and my skin crawled. They weren't just passing through. This was planned, and it was disturbing as hell. A soft tap hit the van's side, then another, like they were testing it. My heart pounded so hard I thought it'd burst. I clutched the multi-tool, its knife blade out, useless against a group. I thought of Dax, how he'd camped here fine. Had he dodged this, or lied? The tap became a scrape, slow and taunting, right by the side door. I bit my lip to stay quiet, remembering a time in Quebec when a bear sniffed my van. That was scary, but this was human, way worse. The voices hushed, and I heard a click, like a lock being picked. They were trying to get in. My safe space was no safe space anymore. I scrambled to the back, checking the blackout curtains. All secure, but it didn't matter. They knew I was inside. A low laugh came from outside, cold and mean, sending chills down my spine. I thought of Vern, his sharp eyes. Was he one of them? Had he tipped someone off? I'd been too trusting, chatting like an idiot. My phone was dead, no signal, no help. Ivy had no clue where I was. I'd screwed up, big time. The scrape stopped, replaced by a heavy thud against the door. The lock held, but the frame groaned. This was a horror movie, and I was the fool who didn't leave. I grabbed a flashlight, keeping it off, and crouched by the bed. My van's layout was tight, no real hiding spot. I thought of Ruth, the hiker Dax mentioned. She'd probably have a plan, like a secret exit. Me? I was winging it. A voice hissed outside. She's got to be in there. My blood froze. They knew I was a woman, alone. How? Had they seen me hiking? The thud hit again, harder, and the door dented inward. I stifled a gasp, my mind racing. I could start the van, but they'd hear it. Waiting was worse. They'd break through soon. The terror was suffocating, every second ticking toward disaster. Another thud, and the door's hinges creaked. I slid to the driver's seat, keys shaking in my hand. Starting the van was my only shot, but the ruts and low gas made it a gamble. I thought of a story Ivy told me, about a woman who escaped a carjacking by flooring it. I needed that kind of guts. The murmurs turned to shouts, angry, urgent. They were done playing. A loud crack split the air, and the side door buckled, a gloved hand reaching through the gap. I screamed, couldn't help it, and dove for the ignition. The van roared, but so did they, banging on the sides like a pack of animals. Headlights on. I caught their faces, 3 men, hoods up, eyes wild. One swung a bat, smashing my side mirror. I threw the van into gear, tires spinning in the dirt. The path was narrow, boulders everywhere, but I didn't care. I hit the gas, the van lurching forward, clipping a tree. They chased on foot, shouting, one throwing something that cracked the rear window. The horror of it, those faces, that bad, pushed me to keep going. I thought of Gina, her tight smile. Had she known about these creeps? The road dipped, and my stomach dropped as the van bounced hard, but I didn't stop. I hit a wider dirt road, the city lights faint below. The men were behind me, but I heard an engine, a vehicle starting. They had a car, or worse, a truck. My gas gauge blinked, dangerously low. I'd been stupid, not filling up, not leaving after the scratches. The van rattled, the buckled door flapping. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white, and kept driving. The engine's roar drowned out their shouts, but not my fear. This wasn't over. The terror was alive, chasing me down the mountain, and I had no idea if I'd make it to safety. I glanced in the rear view. No headlights yet, but I wasn't safe. The road twisted, and I nearly slid into a ditch. My hands shook, the multi-tool useless on the passenger seat. I thought of Ivy, how she'd begged me to get a GPS tracker. Too late now. The van's engine sputtered, gas almost gone. I had to reach Thunder Bay, find a station, anything. But the night was against me, and those men were still out there, their shouts echoing in my head. I didn't know it yet, but the real horror was just beginning. The van lurched down the dirt road, engine coughing as the gas gauge blinked red. Headlights flared in my rear view. A truck, gaining fast. My heart slammed against my ribs. I'd escaped the clearing, but these creeps weren't done. The buckled side door flapped, glass crunching under my tires. I floored it, the van rattling like it'd fall apart. Mount McKay's dark bulk faded behind me, but the horror followed. Those wild-eyed men burned in my mind. I thought of Ivy, how she'd kill me for not texting my location. If I survived this, I'd never hear the end of it. The truck honked, a taunting bellow, and I swerved, nearly hitting a tree. I had to reach Thunder Bay, find help, or I was done. The road widened, but my gas was critical. I remembered a Tim Hortons on the highway, maybe 10 minutes away. If I could get there, someone might be around. Cops, truckers, anyone. The truck rammed my bumper, jolting me forward. I yelped, the multi-tool sliding off the seat. This was a scary game of cat and mouse, and I was the mouse. I thought of Dax, how he'd camped here without a hitch. Had he been lucky, or had I picked the worst night? The van sputtered, and I prayed it'd hold. The truck's lights blinded me, its engine roaring like a predator. I wasn't just running, I was fighting to live. I hit the highway, tires screaming as I pushed the van to its limit. The truck stayed glued to me, ramming again, harder. My rear bumper crunched, and the van fishtailed. I gripped the wheel, thinking of a time in Salt when I skidded on ice and barely recovered. This was worse, way worse. My arm ached from gripping the wheel, my breath ragged. I saw the Tim sign ahead, a faint glow of hope. The truck backed off slightly, maybe spooked by the lights, but it didn't stop. I swerved into the lot, nearly clipping a curb, and slammed the brakes. The place was open, a few cars parked. I had a shot. I leapt out, legs wobbly, and sprinted for the door. The truck idled across the lot, its headlights pinning me. I burst inside, panting, and a cashier, young, maybe 20, looked up, startled. Help! They're after me, I gasped, pointing outside. She grabbed a phone, dialing fast, but her eyes widened as the truck's engine revved. I ducked behind a counter, heart pounding. The horror of being hunted like this was unreal. I thought of Gina's warning. Had she known about these guys? The cashier whispered, "Cops are coming," but it felt like forever. I peeked out. The truck was still there, waiting. The cashier, Jen, pulled me to the back, behind a stack of coffee boxes. "Stay low," she said, her voice shaky. I nodded, clutching my multi-tool, useless now. Outside, doors slammed. They were out of the truck. My stomach dropped. I'd made it to safety, or so I thought, but they weren't giving up. I heard boots crunching, voices muttering. Jen's phone buzzed. A cop was 5 minutes out. 5 minutes was an eternity. I thought of Ruth, the hiker, how she'd probably have outrun these creeps. Me? I was trapped, the scary reality sinking in. The van was trashed, my escape route gone, and they were closing in. A loud bang hit the front door. Glass rattled but didn't break. Jen stifled a scream, and I gripped her arm, both of us shaking. The voices were clearer now, angry, one shouting, "She's in there." My blood ran cold. They'd seen me run in. I thought of a news story from Salt, a robbery where the victim hid but got found. I wasn't that victim. I couldn't be. I whispered to Jen, "Back exit?" She nodded, pointing to a door past the kitchen. We crawled, keeping low, as another bang shook the front. The horror was relentless, every second a fight to survive. We reached the exit, a heavy metal door. Jen fumbled with a key, her hands trembling. I glanced back, hearing shouts and glass cracking. They were breaking in. The door swung open, cold air hitting us. Outside was a dumpster and a dark alley, leading to a side street. I grabbed Jen's hand, pulling her with me. "We gotta move," I said, my voice hoarse. We ran, my lungs burning, the alley's shadows swallowing us. The truck's engine roared somewhere close, and I knew they'd circle around. This wasn't over. The terror was a living thing, chasing us into the night. We hit the street, dodging behind a parked car. Sirens wailed in the distance, finally, but the truck's headlights swept the road. I pushed Jen down, my heart racing. I dragged her into this, another mistake. The van, my home, was gone, probably being torn apart by those creeps. I thought of Ivy, how she'd never forgive me for this. The truck slowed, its driver scanning the street. We held our breath, crouched low, as the sirens grew louder. I prayed the cops would scare them off, but deep down, I knew this was a life or death gamble, and I was running out of moves. The truck stopped, its door creaking open. A figure stepped out, bat in hand, silhouetted against the headlights. Jen whimpered, and I clamped a hand over her mouth, my own fear choking me. The sirens were close, but not close enough. I scanned for an escape. Across the street was a wooded lot, dark and thick. If we could reach it, we might lose them. I whispered, "On 3, we run." Jen nodded, eyes wide. The figure took a step toward us, his bat dragging on the asphalt. The horror of that sound, that moment, was unbearable. I counted 1, 2, 3, and we bolted, the night exploding into chaos as the chase began again. We sprinted across the street, branches clawing us as we dove into the wooded lot. The figure shouted, his voice raw with rage, and the truck's engine roared back to life. My legs burned, Jen stumbling beside me. I'd escaped the van, the Tims, but this was it, the moment it all went wrong. The horror of being hunted, knowing they wouldn't stop, was crushing. I thought of Ivy, how I'd promised to call her tomorrow. That promise was slipping away. The sirens were loud now, but the truck was closer, its headlights cutting through the trees. I'd made a fatal mistake, thinking I could outrun them, dragging Jen into this nightmare. We ducked behind a thick oak, gasping for air. Jen's face was pale, her hands shaking. "Why us?" she whispered. I had no answer. I thought of Vern, his cryptic warning about odd folks. Had he set this up? The bad guy crashed through the brush, his steps heavy, closing in. I gripped my multi-tool, its knife blade out, but it was laughable against a bat. I remembered a self-defense class in SALT, where I learned to aim for the eyes. I wasn't trained for this, but I had to try. The truck circled the lot's edge, its lights pinning us. The terror was suffocating, every choice a step toward doom. I pulled Jen deeper into the woods, aiming for a ravine I'd glimpsed. If we could hide there, maybe the cops would catch up. Branches snapped behind us, the bat guy cursing as he tripped. We slid down the ravine slope, mud caking our clothes. The siren stopped. Cops were here, somewhere, but the truck's engine still growled. I thought of Dax, how he bragged about this spot. Had he known it was a trap? My van, my freedom, was gone, and now Jen's life was on the line. The horror wasn't just my fate. It was the guilt of dragging her into this disturbing mess. We crouched in the ravine, water soaking our shoes. The bad guy's shouts were fainter, but the truck's lights swept above us. I whispered to Jen, "Stay quiet." She nodded, tears streaking her face. I'd been cocky, parking on that mountain, ignoring Gina's warning. Every mistake led here. A twig snapped nearby, and my heart stopped. The bad guy loomed at the ravine's edge, his silhouette monstrous. He hadn't seen us yet, but he was close. I thought of Ruth, how she'd probably have fought back smarter. My only plan was to wait, but waiting felt like surrender. The bad guy slid down, his boots splashing in the water. Jen gripped my arm, her nails digging in. I held the multi-tool, ready to strike, but my hands shook. I thought of a news story from Thunder Bay, a camper attacked in his tent, left for dead. Was this their game? The truck's engine cut off, and voices joined the bad guys. His crew was here. The cops were nowhere, their sirens silent. My stomach dropped. I trusted help would come, another mistake. The horror of facing them, knowing we were out of time, was unbearable. I whispered to Jen, "We fight or we die." I lunged as the bat guy turned, stabbing the multi-tool into his thigh. He roared, swinging the bat, but I ducked, pulling Jen with me. We scrambled up the ravine's other side, his screams echoing. The others shouted, crashing toward us. I'd hurt one, but it only made them angrier. We ran, branches tearing at us, until we hit a clearing. A cop car sat there, lights off, 2 officers slumped inside. Dead, throats cut. My scream caught in my throat. The disturbing truth hit. These creeps weren't just hunters. They'd planned this, taken out the cops. We were alone. I grabbed Jen, diving back into the trees, but the men were on us, their footsteps thunderous. A hand yanked my hair, pulling me down. I swung the multi-tool, hitting nothing. Jen screamed, then went silent, a thud, her body hitting the ground. I thrashed, but a bat cracked my ribs, pain exploding. I thought of Ivy, how she'd never know. My biggest mistake was fighting, thinking I could win. They tied my wrists, dragging me to the truck. The horror wasn't just dying, it was knowing Jen was gone, and I'd led us to this. They threw me into the truck's bed, a tarp smelling of blood covering me. My ribs screamed, my vision blurring. The men argued, one saying, "Clean it up." I was fading, but I heard the bat guy limp over, cursing me. I thought of my van, my sketches, my life, gone. Gina's warning, Vern's eyes, Dax's lies, they'd all led here. The truck started, bouncing over roots. I tried to move, to fight, but my body gave out. The last thing I felt was the tarp's weight. The last thing I heard was their laughter, cold and final, as the night claimed me. The tragedy was sealed. My van life dream, my freedom, ended in Thunder Bay's shadows. Ivy would search, but she'd find nothing. No van, no Nora. Those men, those monsters, would keep hunting, their truck a specter on these roads. I'd ignored warnings, trusted strangers, and paid the price. The horror wasn't just my death, it was the certainty they'd strike again, Mount McKay hiding their secrets. My van would rot somewhere, a ghost of my life, while Thunder Bay's silence swallowed the truth. The road had been my love, but it led to a nightmare I couldn't escape. I'm Jasper Tully, 34 years old, and I hail from North Bay, Ontario. For 3 years, I've lived in my converted Chevy Express van, chasing open roads and quiet nights across Canada. North Bay's got heart, but the wilderness calls louder. Last Friday, I drove 9 hours to Thunder Bay, itching for its rugged trails and Lake Superior vibes. I'd read about a stealth camping spot near Sleeping Giant Provincial Park, east of the city, on a Vanlife app. My van's tricked out, solar panels, a cozy bed, a mini fridge, so I'm set for off-grid life. Thunder Bay felt like a fresh adventure, but as I rolled in at dusk, the park's dense forests gave off a creepy, watchful feel. The drive was long, Highway 1117 weaving through endless pines. I stopped at a gas station in Nipigon, grabbing snacks and chatting with a clerk, Maureen, who eyed my van. "Camping near Sleeping Giant?" she asked, her tone odd. "Watch yourself out there." I laughed, thinking she was just being dramatic, but her stare stuck with me. I'd camped in sketchy spots before, like that time in Saskatchewan when a storm trapped me for days. I could handle this. Still, as I drove toward the park, the sky darkened, and the road felt lonelier than it should have. The Vanlife app swore the spot near Sleeping Giant was gold. Hidden, legal, with a view of the lake. The access road was gravel, rutted from rain, but my van powered through. I parked in a clearing surrounded by towering cedars, the lake's waves a soft hum. It was perfect, or so I thought. I cracked a beer, fired up my stove for tacos, and soaked in the quiet. My cousin, Reed, texted from North Bay, asking for a photo. I sent one of the lake, joking I was king of the wild. But as night fell, the wild felt more like it was sizing me up. I locked the van, standard for stealth camping. My setup's discreet. Blackout shades, no exterior lights, so I vanish in the dark. I scrolled the app, rereading posts about the spot. A vanlifer, Callie, had camped here last year, raving about a local ranger, Hank, who'd shared park tips. Sounded like someone I'd trust. No signal to message her, though, which was normal out here. I ate my tacos, the propane's hiss a small comfort, but my eyes kept darting to the windows. The cedars loomed, their shadows shifting. I told myself it was just the lake breeze. Night hit hard, the kind of dark that eats light. I climbed into bed, LED strips glowing softly inside. I've done solo trips from coast to coast, but this spot felt off, like I'd parked somewhere I shouldn't. I chuckled, thinking of horror movies where the guy ignores the signs and gets screwed. Not me, I thought, but I slid my hatchet under the pillow anyway. It's small, sharp, good for chopping wood, or whatever. I checked the locks twice, Maureen's weird vibe nagging me. The lake's waves were steady, but they couldn't drown out the unease creeping in. Sleep was a no-go. The clearing was too quiet. No owls, no critters, just the waves and my own breathing. I thought of Reed, how he calls my van life hippie nonsense. He's not wrong, but I love it. Still, nights like this made me question my sanity. Around 1 a.m., a noise jerked me awake, a low thump, like something bumped the van. My pulse spiked. Probably a branch, I told myself, but it was disturbing. I lay still, hatchet in hand, listening. Another thump, softer, then a faint drag, like something sliding along the van's side. My gut screamed trouble. I sat up, heart thumping, and eased a shade aside. The clearing was pitch black, cedars blocking the moon. I couldn't see a thing, but that drag came again, slow and deliberate, near the rear door. I thought of Callie's posts. Had she mentioned anything weird? No, just praise for Hank. My van's my fortress, but right now, it felt like a trap. I'd parked deep in the clearing, hidden from the road, so no one should have known I was here. Yet someone, or something, was out there, and it was scary as hell. I killed the LEDs, plunging the van into darkness. The thump stopped, but the drag kept going, circling now. I thought of a time in Manitoba when a coyote scratched my van, curious and harmless. This wasn't that. This felt human, intentional. Maureen's warning replayed. Watch yourself. Had she meant this? I wished I'd asked Hank's contact from Callie. No signal, no backup. I gripped the hatchet, trying to stay calm, but fear clawed at me. The night was alive, and I was in its crosshairs. I ran through my options. Stay put, start the van, or check outside. All bad. I hadn't told Reed my exact spot. Dumb move, Jasper. The dragging stopped, and for a moment, it was just the waves. I almost relaxed, but then a new sound hit. A low whistle, sharp and close, like a signal. My blood ran cold. That wasn't wind or wildlife. Someone was out there, and they weren't alone. I didn't know it yet, but I'd just stumbled into a horror story, and Sleeping Giant was about to wake up. Morning light filtered through the cedars, but it didn't ease the knot in my chest. I'd barely slept, those thumps and that whistle haunting me. I crawled out of bed, hatchet still in hand, and checked the van. The rear door's lock was jimmied, slightly bent, like someone had pried at it. My stomach dropped. I always lock up tight. This wasn't my mistake. Maureen's warning about watching myself felt like a slap now. The clearing looked empty, just waves lapping the lake, but the horror of last night lingered. I needed to hike, clear my head, but the jimmied lock screamed trouble. Stay or go? I wasn't sure, but I couldn't just sit here. I stepped outside, scanning the dirt. Faint scuff marks circled the van. No clear footprints, but enough to make my skin crawl. It was disturbing, like someone had cased me out. I thought of Callie's app post about Hank, the ranger. Maybe he'd know if this spot was safe. I checked the van's tires and gas. Full tank, all good. I'd had a flat once in Alberta, stuck for hours, but this was worse. I decided to hike to Sleeping Giant's lookout, hoping to spot a ranger station or signal. I locked the van, hatchet in my pack, and hit the trail, the lake's hum a shaky comfort. The trail was rugged, climbing through pines and rocky outcrops. The air smelled of moss, but that whistle from last night echoed in my head. I kept checking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to pop out. Reed would call me paranoid, but he wasn't here. A mile in, I found a weird marker, a stick bundle tied with red twine, stuck in the ground. It wasn't a trail sign. It felt like a warning. I'd seen creepy stuff before, like carvings in BC, but this was different. My gut said turn back, but I pushed on, needing answers. The trail's quiet was too heavy, like it was hiding something scary. At the lookout, I met a hiker, a wiry woman in her 40s named Faye. She was sketching the lake, her vibe friendly but guarded. I asked if she'd seen a ranger, mentioning Hank. Her eyes flicked up, sharp. Hank's not around much, she said, then added, be careful camping alone. Her tone was off, like she knew something. It reminded me of Maureen, and it was unsettling. Was Faye hinting at danger, or just cautious? I thanked her and left, her words sticking like burrs. The trail back felt longer, the stick bundle gone when I passed. Someone had moved it. Back at the van, I checked the lock again, still jimmied, and now a faint scratch ran along the rear bumper. Fresh, deliberate. My pulse spiked. Someone had come back while I was gone. The horror of being watched hit hard. I thought of a break-in in North Bay, where thieves scoped a car for days. This felt personal. I had no signal to call Reed or anyone. I'd been dumb, not sharing my plans. The van was my home, but now it felt exposed. Driving to Thunder Bay was an option, but gas stations were far, and I didn't trust the roads after last night. I decided to move the van, find a new spot closer to the park's entrance. It took 15 minutes of slow driving, dodging rocks, to reach a pullout near the main road. Less hidden, but safer, I hoped. I rigged a makeshift alarm, string with bells across the van's bumper, a trick from a Vanlife forum. Callie had mentioned Hank patrolling near the entrance. Maybe I'd spot him. I cooked ramen, but my appetite was gone. Faye's warning, the twine bundle, the scratch bumper, it was piling up, and it was scary. The lake's waves sounded wrong now, like they were whispering. Dusk settled, painting the sky blood red. I double-checked the locks, bells in place, and sat in the dark. Faye's guarded look bugged me. Had she seen something? I'd been too chatty, giving away I was alone. Stupid, Jasper. I thought of Callie, how she'd camped here fine. Maybe I was unlucky, or maybe she'd skipped the bad parts. The bell stayed quiet, but a new noise started, a faint tap, like a stick on metal, near the van's side. My heart raced. I gripped the hatchet, cursing myself for not bolting earlier. The night was closing in, and it felt like a horror trap. I slid to the driver's seat, keys ready, but stayed put. Driving now meant risking those dark roads, and my gas wasn't infinite. The tapping stopped Naaman, replaced by a low hum, almost like voices. Not the waves, human, rhythmic. My mouth went dry. I peeked through a shade gap, seeing nothing but cedars. I remembered a time in Quebec when teens messed with my van, tapping to spook me. This wasn't kids. This was calculated, and it was terrifying. I needed to stay sharp, but fear was winning. The hum grew, and I knew I wasn't alone. I thought of my next move, wait it out or drive. Both felt like losing. I hadn't told Reed where I was, hadn't asked Faye about patrols, more mistakes. The hum was clearer now, words I couldn't catch, like a chant. It was beyond disturbing, like I'd stumbled into something I shouldn't have. I clutched the hatchet, my only defense, and tried to breathe. The bells hadn't rung, but the hum was close, too close. I didn't know it yet, but moving the van hadn't saved me. It had put me right where they wanted me. The hum turned into a chant, low and guttural, slithering through the cedars. I crouched in the van's driver's seat, hatchet in hand, my heart pounding like a drum. The bells hadn't rung, but that chant was close, too close. Human voices weaving a horror I couldn't ignore. The jimmied lock, the scratched bumper, Faye's cryptic warning, it all screamed I'd parked in a trap. My van was my sanctuary, but now it felt like a cage near sleeping giant's dark heart. I thought of Maureen's odd stare at the gas station. Had she known something? The chant grew louder, words unclear but menacing, and I knew this wasn't random. Someone was out there, and they wanted me. I peeked through a shade gap, my breath shallow. Shadows moved beyond the pullout. 3 figures, hooded, slipping between trees. One held a long tool, maybe a crowbar. My gut twisted. This wasn't a prank or lost hikers. They moved with purpose, like hunters. I'd read about a robbery in North Bay where thieves stalked their mark for hours. This was scarier, more deliberate. The chant pulsed, a sick rhythm, and I gripped the hatchet tighter. Starting the van would give me away, but staying felt like waiting to die. The horror of being cornered like this was choking me. A soft scrape hit the van's rear, then a tap, like they were probing. My skin crawled. I slid to the floor, keeping low, the hatchet's handle slick with sweat. The chant was relentless, voices overlapping, and I caught a word, find. My blood ran cold. They were hunting me, knew I was inside. I thought of Callie's post about Hank, the ranger. Had she been wrong about this place? The scrape came again, sharper, near the jimmied lock. I remembered a time in Manitoba when a bear clawed my van. Terrifying, but nothing like this. Humans were worse, and this was a disturbing nightmare unfolding. I crawled to the back, checking the blackout shades. All tight, but it didn't matter. They were testing the van, looking for a way in. A low voice hissed outside, "He's here." My stomach dropped. They knew I was a guy alone. How? Had Faye tipped them off? Her guarded look flashed in my mind. I'd been too open, mentioning Hank. Dumb Jasper. No signal to call Reed, no ranger to save me. A loud thud rocked the rear door, the lock groaning. The horror was real now, no longer a hunch, but a living threat. They were breaking in, and I had seconds to act. I grabbed a flashlight, keeping it off, and wedged myself by the bed. My van's layout was cramped. No hiding spot, no escape hatch. I thought of Hank, how he'd know these woods. Me? I was a sitting duck. The chant surged, frenzied, like they were hyping themselves up. Another thud, and the rear door dented inward. I bit back a curse, my mind racing. I could start the van, ram through them, but the gravel road was a maze, and they'd chase. Waiting was worse. They'd be inside soon. The terror was a weight, crushing my chest, every thud a countdown to disaster. A metallic screech tore through the van. The lock was giving. I scrambled to the driver's seat, keys shaking in my hand. The chant was deafening, voices circling like vultures. I thought of a news story from Thunder Bay, A camper attacked in his sleep, left for dead. Was this their game? A gloved hand pried at the door's gap, and I froze, hard in my throat. I had to move now. I turned the key, the engine roaring, but so did they, banging the van's sides. Headlights on. I saw them. 3 men, faces shadowed, one swinging a crowbar. The horror of their eyes, cold and hungry, burned into me. I threw the van into gear, tires spinning on gravel. The crowbar smashed my side window, glass spraying my arm. I yelped, flooring it, the van lurching forward. They shouted, one throwing something that cracked the rear door. I swerved, dodging a tree, the pullout's ruts shaking the van. The chant followed, fading but not gone, like it was part of the park itself. I thought of Faye, her sketch pad, her warning. Had she set me up? My arm bled, glass embedded, but I kept driving. The road twisted, and I prayed for the highway, but their shouts echoed, and I heard an engine start behind me. I hit the main road, the lake's waves a distant hum. My headlights caught a sign for Thunder Bay, 20 minutes away. My arm throbbed, blood soaking my sleeve, but stopping wasn't an option. I thought of Reed, how he'd lose it if I didn't make it. I'd been stupid, ignoring Maureen, trusting Faye, staying after the whistle. The van rattled, the Jimmy door flapping. In the rear view, headlights appeared, closing fast. A truck, their truck. The scary reality hit. They weren't letting me go. I pushed the van harder, praying for a gas station, cops, anything to end this nightmare. The truck's lights grew brighter, its horn a mocking wail. My gas was fine, but the van was battered, and I was running on fumes of adrenaline. I thought of Callie, how she'd praised this spot. Had she been bait? The road curved, and I nearly skidded off, my hands shaking. I had to reach Thunder Bay, find safety, but the truck was relentless, its engine a growl. The horror wasn't just the chase, it was knowing they'd planned this, targeted me. The highway loomed, a faint hope, but their headlights were a promise of terror, and I wasn't out of the woods yet. The van screamed down the highway, the truck's headlights a relentless glare in my rear view. My arm bled, glass shards biting my skin, but I gripped the wheel, pushing the battered Chevy to its limit. Sleeping giants' dark pines blurred past, the lake's waves a faint echo. The horror of those men, hooded, crowbar-wielding, chanting, drove me forward. Their truck rammed my bumper, the jolt nearly throwing me off the road. I cursed, thinking of Reed, how he'd never forgive me if I didn't make it. Thunder Bay was close, maybe 15 minutes, but the truck was closer, its horn a taunting scream. I had to find help, or this scary chase would be my last. I spotted a gas station's glow ahead, a 24-hour joint I'd passed coming in. If I could reach it, maybe someone would be there, staff, truckers, anyone. The truck rammed again, harder, my rear door flapping like a broken wing. My van fishtailed, tires screeching. I thought of a time in North Bay when I dodged a drunk driver, hard in my throat. This was worse. These guys wanted blood. My hatchet lay on the passenger seat, useless now. The gas station's lights grew brighter, a lifeline, but the truck stayed glued to me, its engine a predatory growl. I wasn't escaping, they were playing with me. I swerved into the station's lot, tires smoking, and slammed the brakes. The truck screeched to a stop across the road, idling, its headlights pinning me. I leapt out, arm throbbing, and sprinted for the door. The clerk, a burly guy named Len, looked up as I burst in, yelling, "Call the cops. They're after me." He grabbed a phone, dialing, but his eyes flicked to the window. The truck hadn't moved, but I heard boots crunching outside. The horror of being so close to safety, yet still trapped, was crushing. Len muttered, "Police are 10 minutes out," but 10 minutes felt like forever in this nightmare. I ducked behind the counter, blood dripping on the floor. Len handed me a rag, whispering, "Stay down." I nodded, clutching my hatchet, its weight a small comfort. The truck's engine revved, then cut off. Doors slammed, 2, maybe 3. They were coming. I thought of Maureen's warning at Nipigon, her odd stare. Had she known about these creeps? Footsteps circled the station, slow and deliberate. A low laugh echoed, cold and mean, sending chills down my spine. The scary truth hit. They weren't scared of the cops. They'd done this before, and I was just their latest game. A loud bang shook the glass door, but it held. Len cursed, grabbing a baseball bat from under the counter. "Back exit," he hissed, pointing to a hallway. I scrambled up, my arm screaming, and followed him. The banging grew frantic, glass cracking. I thought of Callie's post about Hank, the ranger. Had he been part of this? The hallway led to a metal door, and Lynn fumbled with a key. Another crash, glass shattered somewhere inside. The horror was closing in, every second a race against death. We had to move, or we'd be caught like rats. The door swung open, cold air hitting us. Outside was a gravel lot, a dumpster, and a path to the woods. Len grabbed my arm, pulling me out. "Run for the trees," he said, bat ready. We bolted, the path dark and uneven. Shouts erupted behind us. They'd broken in. The truck's engine roared, its headlights sweeping the lot. I thought of Reed, how I'd promised to visit next month. That promise felt hollow now. The woods were our only shot, but the terror of being hunted like this was overwhelming. We dove into the pines, branches clawing us, as the chase turned deadly. We zigzagged through the trees, my lungs burning. Len was fast, but my arm slowed me, blood soaking the rag. The truck's lights cut through the woods, its engine a constant threat. I heard them shouting, voices sharp with rage. I'd escaped the van, the station, but they were relentless. I thought of a survival tip from a Vanlife forum. Lose them in dense cover. These woods were thick, but so were their numbers. A branch snapped nearby, too close. Len grabbed my jacket, yanking me behind a boulder. The horror of their voices, calling "where's he at?" was paralyzing. We were running out of time. We crouched, breathless, as footsteps crunched past. The truck circled the wood's edge, its lights missing us by inches. Len whispered, "There's a road nearby. Flag someone down." I nodded, but doubt gnawed at me. The men were spreading out, their shouts closer. I thought of Faye, her sketchpad, her warning. Had she sent them? My arm throbbed, my vision blurring from blood loss. We crept toward the road, staying low, but a figure loomed ahead, hooded, crowbar raised. Len swung his bat, but a second guy tackled him from the side. I screamed, swinging my hatchet, but it was chaos, and I was losing. I broke free, sprinting for the road, leaving Len behind. Guilt hit hard, but stopping meant death. The truck's headlights swept toward me, and I dove into a ditch, heart pounding. Sirens wailed in the distance. Cops, finally. But the men were close, their footsteps heavy. I clutched the hatchet, my only defense, and crawled through the ditch, mud caking my clothes. The horror wasn't just the chase. It was knowing I'd dragged Len into this, maybe got him killed. The road was near, but so were they, and the night was a maze of terror with no clear way out. I crawled through the ditch, mud sucking at my knees, the hatchet slick in my hand. The sirens were louder, but the men's shouts were closer, their crowbars dragging through brush. I'd escaped the van, the station, but this was it, the moment it all collapsed. The horror of leaving Len, of facing these monsters alone, was a knife in my gut. I thought of Reed, how he'd search for me if I didn't come home. The truck's headlights swept the road above, and I froze, praying they'd miss me. My arm bled bad, my strength fading. I'd made a deadly mistake, running without a plan, thinking I could outsmart them. They were hunters, and I was prey. A figure loomed at the ditch's edge, crowbar glinting. I held my breath, heart hammering. He was alone, scanning slow, his hood hiding his face. I thought of a bar fight in North Bay, where I ducked a swing and ran. This was scarier. No crowd, no escape. The siren stopped, cops nearby, but not here. I gripped the hatchet, ready to swing, but my arm shook. The guy stepped closer, boots splashing mud. I thought of Maureen, her warning. Had she known these creeps? The disturbing truth hit. This was their turf, their game. I'd never had a chance. I lunged, swinging the hatchet at his leg. It connected, a sickening thud, and he roared, stumbling. I scrambled up, running for the road, his curses chasing me. The truck's engine revved, headlights blinding. Another man grabbed my arm, wrenching it back. Pain exploded, the hatchet falling. I kicked, but he was stronger, slamming me to the ground. The horror of their faces, cold, empty, like I was nothing, was worse than the pain. I thought of Callie, her lies about this place. My van, my life, was gone, and Reed would never know why. They dragged me to the truck, my arm useless, blood pooling. The crowbar guy limped over, rage in his eyes, and swung. The blow cracked my ribs, air rushing out. I gasped, vision swimming. They tied my wrists, rope biting deep, and threw me in the truck's bed. A A tarp smelled of rot, covering me like a shroud. The terror wasn't just dying, it was knowing Lynn was probably dead, and I'd led us there. Faye's warning, Hank's absence, it all fit. They'd planned this, targeted Vanlifers. The truck started, bouncing over gravel, as I fought to stay conscious. I faded in and out, the tarp stink choking me. Voices argued up front. One said, "Dump him quick." My heart sank. I thought of a news story from Thunder Bay, campers vanishing, their gear found scattered. Was this their fate? My van was trashed, probably burning by now. I'd been cocky, ignoring Maureen, trusting Callie's app. Every mistake led here. The truck slowed, and I heard water, the lake. They were taking me to Sleeping Giant's shore. The horror of what came next, drowning, or worse, was a weight I couldn't bear. I tugged at the ropes, my wrists raw, but I was too weak. The truck stopped, doors slamming. They yanked the tarp off, the lake's waves loud in the dark. The crowbar guy grabbed me, his limp not slowing him. I thought of Reed, how I'd promised to teach him van life someday. That dream was dead. They dragged me to the water, the cold biting my skin. I screamed, but a fist silenced me, blood filling my mouth. The disturbing reality was clear. They'd done this before, would do it again. Sleeping Giant's beauty hid their evil, and I was its latest victim. The water hit my knees, then my chest, as they pushed me in. I thrashed, but the ropes held, my ribs screaming. The crowbar guy laughed, a sound that cut deeper than the cold. I thought of Len, how I'd left him. My biggest mistake was running, abandoning him to save myself. The horror wasn't just my death, it was the guilt, the lives I'd cost. The lake closed over me, dark and endless. I saw Maureen's face, Faye's sketchpad, Callie's lies. They'd all led here. My lungs burned, my body gave out, and the waves took me under. I don't know how long I fought, but it wasn't enough. The lake was my grave, Sleeping Giant my silent witness. Reed would search, but he'd find nothing. No van, no Jasper. Those men would keep hunting, their truck prowling Thunder Bay's roads. I'd ignored warnings, trusted strangers, and paid the ultimate price. The horror wasn't just my end. It was the certainty they'd strike again, the park's beauty a mask for their evil. My van, my freedom, was a memory, lost to the waves, as the wilderness swallowed my story. The tragedy was complete. Vanlife was my love, but Thunder Bay was my undoing. The lake's waves would roll on, hiding the truth, while those creeps planned their next hunt. I'd chased solitude, found terror, and left only questions. Reed would mourn, but never know how it ended. The disturbing legacy of Sleeping Giant was its silence, letting monsters thrive. My van would rust somewhere, a ghost of my dreams, as the road I loved became the path to a nightmare I couldn't escape.